Chapter 262. The cold moon was like a hook hanging high up in the sky, spreading down a chill. Great Xia had entered winter from late autumn, and half of its territory had started to freeze. On the western battlefield, the Eternal Night Cult's army had launched a large-scale invasion. The Blackwater army was pinned down by the cult's heavy cavalry, while the Divine Martial Army was at the rear. More than 100,000 soldiers from different battlefields took turns to attack. Around Marquis' victorious return, lines of formation runes rose. 49 Pinnacle Heaven's Reach warriors joined forces to protect the formation, temporarily trapping the Great Xia war god. The foundation of the Eternal Night Cult was so deep that it was frightening. In the human world, a peak rank 9 martial artist would be regarded as a consecrator. However, the second palace of the Eternal Night Cult had produced such a shocking number of powerhouses. Even though Qianxiu had been preparing for this moment for a long time, the formation he laid down was extremely powerful. Even someone as powerful as the Great Xia war god couldn't break it in a short period of time. In the royal capital of Grand Xia, numerous silhouettes appeared, their auras towering up into the sky, terrifying to the extreme. The person in the lead was dressed in a light purple fur coat. He had a handsome face and a slightly cold expression. Behind him, 12 figures stood in a row. Just by standing there, they gave off a terrifying feeling that they were heavier than mountains. The Divine Martial Guards, the personal guards of the second hall head of Eternal Night. Every generation, there were only 12 of them, and the weakest was half-step to Xiantian. The Xiantian realm was a huge moat on the martial path, and it was extremely difficult to cross. However, in this generation of Divine Martial Guards, 2 people had managed to cross it. The cultivation of the Divine Martial Guards was special, and the green-white armor they wore was also different. It was carved with complicated formation patterns, and each one of them had an unimaginably huge price to pay. Even the Eternal Night Cult, which had a deep foundation, found it difficult to do so. However, the combat strength of the Divine Martial Guards was shocking, and each one of them was comparable to Xiantian. Especially the 2 who had stepped into Xiantian, they were extremely terrifying. As soon as Zhong Qianxiu and the others appeared, Xia Zi, Grand Preceptor, and Qin Ning, who were in King Haowu's manor, Grand Preceptor's manor, and the Imperial Palace, all sensed the presence of Zhong Qianxiu's group. Just the 3 of you? Zhong Qianxiu swept his gaze over them. Zhong Qianxiu, you shouldn't have come here. The Grand Tutor took half a step forward and said coldly. First Khanate tribulation. Even the capital of the Confucian sect has fallen to such a state. It seems the once flourishing Confucian sect has also declined, said Zhong Qianxiu. In the academy, 2 powerful figures were confronting each other. One was Dean Tian-Tsang and the other was the Eternal Night Martial Monarch. Their auras collided within a radius of 30 meters, forming an absolute forbidden domain. Not far away, in an ordinary courtyard, the headmaster stood up and picked up a lamp. His old body began to bend. 2 years had passed, and the headmaster had aged even more. The headmaster didn't care about the battle between the college and the imperial city. When he heard the voices of the people in the world, he sighed. What they didn't know was that the decline of the Confucian school was not because of their martial prowess, but because of their hearts. As for why there were fewer and fewer Xiantian experts in the Confucian sect in the last 1,000 years, the reason was because of him. Teacher, you just broke through not too long ago, so your realm isn't stable yet. Zi should do it, Xia Zi said calmly as she walked out. Be careful. The Grand Advisor did not try to be brave and instructed. Yes. Xia Zi nodded and clenched her fist. An ancient sword appeared in the form of an autumn water splendor. The famed edge of the Confucian school, the silent autumn waters. Behind him, Qin Ning flipped her hand and took out the silver spear blade and body. After combining them, she stood quietly at the side, ready to attack at any time. Hua Zhuang, Zhong Qianxiu said. As she spoke, a beautiful figure walked out. She wore a green and white battle suit. Her expression was calm, and she didn't smile at all. Hua Zhuang was one of the 2 Xiantian experts in this generation's 12 divine martial guards. After Hua Zhuang, 5 figures walked out and surrounded Great Xia's King Haowu. The 6 divine martial guards stood in the air. The battle patterns on their battle suits flickered, giving half-step Xiantian experts the ability to walk in the air. The leader, Hua Zhuang, was already at the second tribulation of the Xiantian realm. With the battle suit behind her, her aura was even more terrifying. Zhong Qianxiu waved his hand, and rays of light landed on the 6 of them. Instantly, their aura became even stronger, causing others to be terrified. The Grand Advisor, Qin Ning, had a serious expression. While she was watching this battle, she was also on guard against the others. Kill! Hua Zhuang ordered calmly. She took a step forward with her halberd in hand. Her halberd shook the world, causing the heavens and earth to lose their color. Xia Zi's expression did not change. Righteous qi exploded from her body. White light rose, and autumn water flowed. Her sword met the halberd head-on. With a loud bang, the void exploded. Terrifying shockwaves spread out, shaking the heavens and the earth. At the same time, the other 5 rushed forward. Saber lights were everywhere, and the situation was instantly sealed. The 6 of them formed a formation. Their terrifying combat power was comparable to the 3rd tribulation of the Xiantian realm. At this moment, sharp killing lights flashed continuously. With the situation pressing, silent autumn water no longer remained silent. She released a dazzling light. The halberd light was heavy, the sword light was heavy, and the saber light was fast, but the sword light was even faster. The 6 of them formed a formation, but for a moment, they didn't gain anything. Xia Zi, who was only at the 2nd tribulation of the Xiantian realm, had displayed shocking combat power. Oh! Zhong Qianxiu's eyes flashed. He didn't expect Great Xia's King Haowu to be so capable. If Ning Chen was here, he wouldn't be surprised. Although the former first prince of Grand Xia was kind-hearted and wasn't suitable to be an emperor, he was a true heaven's chosen. If it wasn't for that arrow, he might have left the rest of the younger generation far behind. Xia Zi didn't like to fight. Hence, in the eyes of the world, he wasn't that dazzling. Compared to Underworld's child of hell, God Sect's child of God, and Sword One of Desolate City, he was much weaker. However, in terms of true strength, Great Xia's King Haowu wasn't weaker than anyone. In fact, he might even be stronger. With the 5 sabers working together, Hua Zhuang gave up on defense and only attacked. God power added to the halberd's might, causing a huge explosion. Xia Zi's sword blocked the pass. Righteous qi was dazzling, lighting up the entire sky of the imperial city. His sword was like 1,000 caddies, breaking through the heavens and sinking into the ocean. Remnant wind. Seeing that the person in the formation was unshakable, Zhong Qianxiu summoned another Xiantian. Remnant wind walked out, and the remaining 5 divine martial guards followed. Their figures flashed as they stepped into the battle. A silver spear light swept out, blocking the 6 of them. Qin Ning also entered the battle. Grand Sage couldn't continue to watch, so he opened the Confucian sect golden scroll to help Qin Ning. Saber light and sword shadows crisscrossed, and the silver spear flew back and forth. After adding on the power of the Confucian sect golden scroll, it also didn't allow Remnant Wind and the others to take a step forward. The 2 of them fought bravely, using their ultimate techniques to protect the 1,000-year dynasty and its millions of citizens. However, the strongest among them had yet to make a move. Zhong Qianxiu's cold eyes flickered with a brilliant light as he walked forward step by step. With a lift of his right hand, numerous runes flew out and formed a gigantic formation in the sky. Within the heavenly mandate palace, 3 dark dragon guard commanders with golden patterns on their robes knelt, asking the person on the throne to give the order to activate the foundation of the nation armament. Xia Mingri got up and said, "Permission granted." The three Dark Dragon Guard commanders deeply bowed, and their figures flashed as they disappeared from the palace. Not long after, the ground beneath the imperial palace rumbled. Under the purple fate that was countless times stronger than the fate of the Lihua dynasty, several powerful auras appeared. The next moment, an old figure opened his eyes. He only glanced at the sky before walking up. An ancient and desolate aura rippled out from the elder's body. Although it was powerful, it was short-lived. The last light of his life was only allowed to shine once. "Welcome, Emperor Xiao Yu." Xia Mingyue knelt down. This was the first time he had kowtowed to someone since becoming an emperor. Great Xia's Emperor Xiao Yu was the only brother of the 13th generation emperor of Great Xia. The two of them had worked together to protect Great Xia for 40 years. Within the killing formation, Xia Zi sensed the unique bloodline aura of the imperial family from the elder. His body trembled, and a trace of sadness appeared in his eyes. Not bad. The old man glanced at Chu Zi, who was fighting bravely in the middle of the formation. A faint gratification flashed across his aged face. The bloodline of the imperial clan did not disappoint him. Seeing the elder's appearance, Zhong Qianxiu frowned. A peak third tribulation expert was not to be underestimated. Yin and Yang, 4 divisions, no sun in 8 directions, raging sea of thunder. Zhong Qianxiu formed a seal with both hands. Thunder rumbled as the dark clouds in the sky roared. Terrifying bolts of lightning crisscrossed, turning the surrounding 300 meters into a sea of thunder. The might of the curse shook the heaven and earth. As the lightning descended, the Emperor Xiao Yu's feet moved and arrived in front of the Evernight strategist. He slapped out with a palm, causing the surrounding space to tremble. Zhong Qianxiu flipped his palm to block the attack. With a bang, he was forced back 3 steps as his blood and qi churned. Great Xia's foundation is indeed extraordinary. Unfortunately, it won't last long. Thunderbolts descended, filling the eyes with dazzling lightning. Xiao Yuwang's figure shifted rapidly, constantly switching between the thunderbolts. He could not avoid them, so he turned his palms to block them. However, every time he blocked a thunderbolt, his aura would weaken a little. Zhong Qianxiu saw that the person in front of him could not last long, so he chose not to clash head-on. Instead, he used his lightning arts to trap the enemy and wait for the former to dissipate. "You're going too far." Amidst the killing formation, Xia Zi could feel the Emperor Xiao Yu's aura weakening. His rage could no longer be suppressed, and killing intent finally appeared. The winds and clouds on his sword changed as the righteous energy turned benevolent, showing signs of Azura. Hua Zhuang and the others immediately felt the pressure increase. A sword light flashed in front of one of the divine martial guards, and by the time he turned around, his head had already been separated from his body. Xia Zi took the halberd head-on and flew out of the killing formation. He arrived in front of Zhong Qianxiu in an instant and slashed down with his sword. Zhong Qianxiu retreated and dodged the sword. His right hand flashed, and 4 talismans flew out. Yin and Yang, 4 divisions, no sun in 8 directions, borrowing power from heaven and earth. 4 flame divine generals appeared in the world. Each of them was over 30 meters tall, and when they swung their fists down, a terrifying heatwave ignited the surrounding air. The Evernight military advisor had gone all out with the descent of the divine generals and the martial monarch. Just at this moment, ghostly energy spread out from the distant horizon. Amidst the ringing of bells, a person and a palanquin slowly walked over. Beside the palanquin, a familiar figure appeared. His white robes fluttered in the wind. At this moment, everyone in the world was shocked. Looking at the figure beside the palanquin, their faces were filled with disbelief. Sensing the dangerous aura coming from this person, Master Yan's expression turned serious. He said, "Your name?" "Great Xia Jiming Marquis, Ning Chen." Chapter 263. The most ordinary name gave people the deepest shock. Wu Ho, who sacrificed everything to protect Great Xia, had finally returned after 2 years. Welcome, Wu Ho. In the palace, the dragon guards were the first to react. They put down their weapons and knelt down respectfully to welcome the return of their Marquis. Welcome, Wu Ho. After the dragon guards knelt down, the imperial guards also came back to their senses. They knelt down one by one with respect to welcome the return of Wu Ho. After the shock, the people in the palace also reacted. They looked at the familiar figure in the sky. At this moment, guilt, regret, excitement, and all sorts of thoughts flashed across their minds. Finally, they knelt down and bowed respectfully. Welcome, Wu Ho. The people who knelt down in the city kowtowed together with the most sincere respect. The deafening greeting shook the heavens and the earth. It resounded throughout the entire palace, announcing Great Xia's gratitude and longing for the person in the sky. At the most difficult moment, the white figure was not only covered in blood, but also took on the infamy of the world. He silently endured everything and sacrificed everything to protect Great Xia. In front of the heavenly mandate palace, Xia Mingri looked at the scene in front of him. Although he had mixed feelings, he did not say anything. In the ghost carriage, the ghost girl walked out. Looking at the figures below, she was shocked. Rise, said Ning Chen. He was as calm as ever, and there wasn't much emotion in his voice. Inside and outside the palace, after hearing the voice from the sky, everyone got up. Looking at the sky, the worry on their faces disappeared. There was no longer the fear of the enemy's invasion. In the past, Wu Ho was able to lead Great Xia through difficult times. Today, he would be able to do the same. Behind the 4 flame generals, Zhong Qianxiu squinted his eyes. Jiming Marquis, so he was the legendary Wu Ho of Great Xia who stopped Lingyue from going south. Ning Chen glanced at the situation on the battlefield and roughly understood. He walked to Xia Zi's side and asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." The murderous vibes around Xia Zi gradually dissipated, and the undetectable change disappeared. The qi of righteousness once again filled his entire body. Seeing the change in Xia Zi's body, Ning Chen's eyes flashed with worry. However, this was not the time to say anything. He focused on the enemy. "Leave this person to me," Ning Chen said softly. N. Xia Zi nodded. His figure flashed and appeared beside Xiao Yuang, waving his sword to block the thunderbolts in the sky. The power of talismans was amazing. Zhong Qianxiu was the second lord of the Eternal Night Palace. In addition to his outstanding strategy, his attainments in formations and incantations were extraordinary. Coupled with his cultivation of the third tribulation of the innate realm, his threat was no less than that of the Eternal Night Martial Monarch. On Ning Chen's left and right, 4 flame deity generals surrounded him. Their giant fists fell, and waves of fire covered the sky and covered the earth. The remembrance blade appeared out of thin air. The pure white blade spun, and rays of blade light spread out. The flame general's arm was immediately torn apart, scattering in all directions. However, in the next moment, a shocking scene occurred. The flames that filled the sky quickly gathered at the flame divine general's severed arm, and in the blink of an eye, it grew back. Ning Chen frowned slightly. He reached out and grabbed the remembrance saber. His figure flickered and slashed at Zhong Qianxiu, who was not far away. "Is it that simple?" Zhong Qianxiu sneered coldly. With a wave of his sleeve, the 4 flame divinity generals disappeared and turned into 4 walls of fire in front of him. Boom! As the sharp blade light fell, the 4 divine flame generals collapsed one after another and scattered. Soon after, they gathered together again and were completely unharmed. 3,000 miles of sword snow. Ning Chen's expression turned serious. He raised his hand and pointed. Once again, frost surged around his body, and boundless cold air spread out rapidly. The temperature of 1,000 feet around him suddenly dropped, turning into a world of wind and snow. The sword intent spread out in the wind and snow, and the 4 frozen flame deity generals instantly fell apart, unable to gather again. Zong Qianxiu narrowed his eyes. The dark green talisman appeared again in his right hand. With a wave of his hand, evil qi covered the moon. In the space stirred, half of a terrifying evil god with a green face and fangs appeared. Never ending. Before he finished speaking, Ning Chen's figure had already disappeared. The blade light was awe-inspiring, and it instantly arrived in front of Zong Qianxiu to take his life. The green talisman was split in half by the blade light, and the evil god that had not fully manifested dissipated. It could not descend. Zong Qianxiu's footsteps shifted as he dodged the blades that were ceaselessly descending upon him. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that the other 2 battles were similarly at a disadvantage, and they were even faintly showing signs of defeat. He understood in his heart that his plan today had already failed. Retreat. Zong Qianxiu pushed away the blade light in front of him and retreated dozens of feet. He waved his hand and summoned a boundless sea of fire. Hua Zhuang, remnant wind, and the others immediately retreated. Jiming Marquis. I will remember it. However, you will soon realize that the enemy you are facing is not as simple as 2 years ago. Behind the sea of fire, Zong Qianxiu laughed coldly, and his figure faded away. Perhaps. Ning Chen waved his hand, and Nianqing retracted her brilliance. The battle ended, and the commoners and soldiers below rejoiced. Their nervous mood was finally put down. Imperial Ancestor. In the sky, Xia Zi supported the Xiaoyu king, who was already at the end of his life. A trace of sadness flashed across his eyes. The Xiaoyu king looked at the royal bloodline in front of him and then at the youth not far away. He no longer had any worries in his heart. It was enough for great Xia to have such a royal bloodline and a martial marquis. Before he could say another word, Xiaoyu king's body quickly disintegrated, turning into dust that filled the air and dissipated. The years that he owed were finally repaid at this moment. Looking at this scene, Ning Chen's heart was inexplicably complicated, and he fell silent. Imperial Ancestor Xiaoyu. Xia Zi felt a pain in his heart. A trace of grey aura flashed through his boundless righteousness. It was so fast, but it was still seen by Ning Chen, who was not far away. What happened? Let's go down. The Grand Advisor looked at everyone and said. Okay. The people in the sky all nodded. Their figures flashed, and they descended from the sky. Qi Ning walked over, and without saying anything, she slapped him mercilessly. Ning Chen held his head in pain, but could only smile apologetically. He did not dare to say anything. Immediately return to the palace with me to see the Empress. Qi Ning said with a cold face. Ning Chen did not dare to say anything. He nodded and signaled to the ghost girl not far away, then left with Qi Ning. When he passed by Xia Zi, Ning Chen paused, but did not know how to remind him. He could only suppress the uneasiness in his heart and continue forward. In the imperial palace, the doors opened. The dragon guards respectfully knelt down, and their majestic figures lined up from the entrance to the main palace. Greetings to the Marquis. Once upon a time, when he went south to resist the Buddha kingdom, the Battle of Mount Wuxia, and quelled the rebellion in the imperial city, the soldiers of the dragon guards had always followed their Marquis. They had witnessed his sacrifice for the Xia kingdom. Even in the darkest moment, when the world cursed him, they had never doubted their Marquis. Rise. It was still the same calm voice, but this time, there was something more. Ning Chen looked at the familiar faces on both sides, and a touch of warmth flashed through his heart. In the heavenly mandate palace, Xia Mingri saw the two coming and nodded in greeting. Ning Chen briefly explained the situation of the 4 extremities, mainly describing the characteristics of the person who came back with him, so that Xia Mingri could pay more attention. If a Xiantian expert wanted to hide, it would be very difficult to find. However, the people of the four extremities must have come to completely open the passage between the two realms. Then, they must have found a strong cultivator of the three disasters realm to help. This was the only clue, and also the most important one. In the divine prefecture, the number of strong cultivators of the three disasters realm could be counted on one hand. The college chief of the academy, the golden staff imperial preceptor of northern Meng, and the martial lord of the eternal night god. As for the others, they were more or less fake. Having the combat power of the three disasters realm did not mean that they were in the three disasters realm. Mu Bai, Marquis Victorious Return, and the former Prince Yen were typical examples. As for the abbot of the Du Yi Temple, he was indeed in the three disasters realm. However, after being nailed to Mount Mijia and burned with resentment for several days and nights, no one knew what realm he was in now. To completely open the passage between the two realms, it required an extremely large amount of power. Only those in the three disasters realm could do it. As for whether the combat power of the three disasters realm was feasible, no one knew, and no one dared to take the risk. According to the rumors, the Eternal Night God sect should have two strong cultivators above the three disasters realm, and the martial lord was one of them. However, until now, even the second palace of the Eternal Night God had appeared, and that strong cultivator of the three disasters realm still had not appeared. This made people wonder whether this strong cultivator of the three disasters realm still existed. After all, no matter how strong a person was, he could not withstand the erosion of time. Even the Xiantian realm could only live for 200 or 300 years. Under normal circumstances, without a large amount of natural treasures to prolong their lives, there were not many people who could live for more than 300 years. Even if their cultivation reached the heavens, and they entered the three disasters realm, they could not live for more than 500 years. After hearing about the four extremes realm, Xia Mingri's expression was incomparably solemn. He did not expect that there would be such a great danger right in front of him. Indeed, before the first wave had subsided, another wave had risen. The two discussed for a while. Xia Mingri glanced at Qin Ning, who was quietly waiting not far away, and said seriously, "You just came back. Go to the Weiyang Palace and pay your respects first. We can talk about other things later." "Okay." Ning Chen nodded, and turned to leave with Qin Ning. Originally, men were not allowed to enter the harem, let alone at night. However, the Marquis of Jiming was an exception. In the world, everyone knew that when Ning Chen was still a little eunuch, he worked in the Weiyang Palace until he left the palace and became a marquis. It could be said that he was taught by the former Empress Zhongsun. For a long time, the Marquis of Jiming could enter and leave the Weiyang Palace freely. It was a matter that everyone tacitly agreed. No one would make a fuss about it. There was no need, and no one dared. Now, it was even more impossible. In the Weiyang Palace, the Zhongsun Palace was brightly lit, but it was a bit too quiet. The Zhongsun Palace was already asleep. The palace was not lit by the lights, but by the night luminescent pearl that Ning Chen had once offered. The battle in the sky was so shocking that all the people in the imperial city were alarmed. Only the Zhongsun Palace was peaceful. There was no sound at all. In these 2 years, the Empress was easily awakened. So, every night, I would seal the Empress's palace and not let anyone disturb her. Qin Ning said. Why not cover the night luminescent pearl? Ning Chen asked softly. We can't cover it. Once it is covered, the Empress will immediately wake up. Qin Ning's expression flashed a touch of sadness. Chapter 264. 2 years had passed and Zhongsun had changed a lot. Although her face was still beautiful, her hair was covered with white frost. Ning Chen suddenly felt fear in his heart. It was a fear that he had never felt before. All along, Zhongsun had been a beautiful and strong figure in his eyes. Only today did he realize that Zhongsun was also gradually aging without him noticing. In his heart, Zhang Sun was his only elder in this world. Her position was so important that no one could replace her. Gently pushing open the door without making any sound, Ning Chen walked into the room. Looking at the sleeping figure on the bed, he silently knelt down. The light of the night pearl shone on the plain clothes, reflecting a heart filled with guilt. The kneeling figure was no longer the Marquis of Wuxia. He was just a wanderer who had left home for a long time. Qi Ning did not stop him. She quietly stood at the side and waited. In the quiet palace, the kneeling plain clothes did not move. 2 years had changed too many things. The only thing that did not change was the feelings of protecting each other. Without Zhang Sun, Ning Chen would not be who he was today. This feeling was hard to return. The cold moon shone in the sky and gradually headed west. Unknowingly, Zhang Sun opened her eyes on the phoenix couch. Just as she sat up, she suddenly felt a familiar aura not far from the bed. She looked over in disbelief. The next moment, her body trembled and tears flowed down silently. "You're back." The saddest thing in life was when a white-haired person sent off a black-haired person. She once thought that the tablet on the Marquis temple would be placed by her personally. The wooden tablet that was sent over was carved with thousands of carvings. Today, he was back. "Come here." Zhang Sun waved her hand and said softly. Ning Chen stood up and silently walked to the side of the phoenix couch and sat down. Zhang Sun raised her hand and caressed the face of the young man in front of her. Her eyes were filled with tears again. "You've grown up." She still remembered that when he first entered the palace, he was still a reckless young man. Almost 4 years had passed and the young man in the past had lost his childishness. He had truly grown up. Ning Chen did not know what to say. No matter how eloquent he was, at this moment, only guilt was left in his heart. It was getting late outside. Although the night had not completely dispersed, Zhang Sun was no longer sleepy. She got up and walked down from the phoenix couch. In front of the dressing table, a beautiful face was reflected in the bronze mirror. The passage of time did not leave many traces on the face of the person in the mirror, just like when they first met 3 years ago. Qi Ning walked forward and picked up the silver comb on the table, preparing to dress her grandson as usual. "Let me do it." Ning Chen took the silver comb and asked softly. Qi Ning nodded and retreated to the side. After leaving for 2 years, Zhang Sun's hair had grown even longer. It hung down his back and reached his waist. Ning Chen held a comb and combed it seriously with a calm expression. The familiar warm aura made one feel at ease. Only in this Weiyang palace could he let down his guard and not think about the storms outside. In the past, when he was at his weakest, it was Zhang Sun who used her own wings to protect him time and time again. Now that he had reached the Xiantian realm, he no longer needed Zhang Sun's protection, but he still could only feel that peace by her side. "That sister of yours is not bad," Zhang Sun said softly as she looked at her reflection in the mirror. "Ning Shi?" Ning Chen asked. "Yes, I've already accepted her as my adopted daughter. However, before I get married, I'll continue to live in your Wu Marquis manor," said Zhang Sun. As long as Ning Shi is willing, Ning Chen naturally has no objections. "I'll follow your arrangements," replied Ning Chen. "What about you? You've already rejected the little princess of the barbarian dynasty and Xinu that I arranged for you. Do you have anyone you like now? If you like any girl, I'll personally propose marriage for you," said Zhang Sun seriously. Ning Chen bitterly smiled. What he was most afraid of was Zhang Sun mentioning this matter. Nyang, Ning Chen has already reached the Xiantian realm. His lifespan is different from ordinary people. "There's no need to be in such a rush," said Qi Ning. Zhang Sun fell silent. After a long time, she looked at herself in the mirror and muttered, "But I can't wait." It was a very soft sentence, but it made the 2 people present tremble. Looking at the strands of white hair that could be faintly seen in Zhang Sun's hair, their hearts ached. Zhang Sun really was no longer young. A mortal's lifespan was only 60 years. Zhang Sun was not a Xiantian, so she could not keep waiting. I'll follow your arrangements. Ning Chen suppressed the bitterness in his heart and no longer insisted. How about 3 years? Zhang Sun naturally hoped that Ning Chen could be together with the person he liked, so she didn't want to force him. Softly, she said, if you still haven't found the person you like after 3 years, then I'll make the arrangements. 3 years wasn't a short time. At that time, she would have more than half of her doubts. It was also the longest time she could wait. Although a mortal's lifespan was 60 years, there weren't many that could live past the age of destiny. In the past 2 years, she had gradually felt that her body was getting worse by the day. According to Great Xia's customs, the marriage of the younger generation had to have the blessing of the older generation. Xinu and Z still had imperial uncles that were still alive. As for Ning Chen, he only had her as an elder. He was the person she was most worried about. After her hair was combed, the rest of the makeup was taken care of by Qin Ning. Ning Chen stood to the side and waited quietly. Ever since she had retired behind the scenes, Zhang Sun rarely stepped out of Weiyang Palace. Her makeup had also become much simpler. She looked less luxurious and more simple. After winter, Great Xia had just experienced a bout of snow. The back garden of Weiyang Palace was covered in a layer of silver. It was very beautiful. Zhang Sun was supported by Qin Ning and Ning Chen as they walked in the back garden. Suddenly, she saw a maple tree in the corner and paused. Ning Chen followed her gaze and immediately understood what Zhang Sun was thinking. Back then, I heard Qin Ning say that you climbed from this tree to her roof to look at the stars, disturbing her rest. Zhang Sun's beautiful face revealed an almost undetectable smile. At the time I just entered the palace, I didn't think too much about it. I saw a tree next to the wall, so I climbed up. I didn't think that below it was Qin Ning's room, said Ning Chen. After saying this, Ning Chen glanced at the woman on the other side and smiled. However, Qin Ning's temper is good. She didn't bicker with me. Qin Ning turned her head, her right hand cracking. Her warning was very clear. This brat's skin was itching again. Zhang Sun smiled. How could she not understand the meaning behind Ning Chen's words? However, she ignored it. The younger generation was playing around. Let them do as they pleased. The three of them walked in the back garden. Most of the time, they didn't have much to say. 2 years had passed. There were too many things that needed to be said. When they were about to speak, they felt that there was no need. The rising sun shone on their bodies, bringing a slight warmth. Zhang Sun was tired from walking. The three of them sat on a stone bench in the garden to rest for a while. Qin Ning had brought a thick cotton cushion. It wouldn't be cold to sit on it. She had specially prepared it for Zhang Sun. Ning Chen saw that Qin Ning had carefully prepared everything. He inexplicably sighed in his heart and also sat down beside Zhang Sun. There wasn't much time left like this. He could only cherish every moment. Not long after, a delicate palace maid walked into the back garden. Seeing the three of them, she bowed and said, "Your Highness, Marquis, breakfast is ready." The palace maid was very unfamiliar and young. She should have just entered the palace not long ago. It was indeed fortunate that she was assigned to Weiyang Palace. Ning Chen responded. He immediately helped Zhang Sun up and walked out of the back garden. The palace maid followed behind. Her pretty little face was flushed. Her eyes were filled with admiration. She had also seen the great battle last night. Lord Wu Ho was really too powerful. Which family's young man wasn't passionate? Which family's young lady wasn't yearning for love? The palace maid was in the prime of her life. Of course, she would also admire heroes. Qin Ning helplessly shook her head. She didn't shatter the little girl's beautiful dream. She just put the blame on Ning Chen, who was beside Zhang Sun. Breakfast had already been sent to the hall. It was very simple. It was all like vegetarian dishes. In these 2 years, Zhang Sun had already stopped killing and didn't touch meat. Many people in the palace said that compared to the Buddha in the temple, their empress was more like a Buddha. Actually, the people of Wuxia didn't believe in Buddha. Zhang Sun, as the former empress, was naturally the same. However, whether she believed it or not, she still hoped to pray for him. After breakfast, the people in and out of the palace came one by one. It wasn't appropriate for Ning Chen to stay any longer. Thus, he bid farewell to Zhang Sun. Everyone in the manor knew that the Marquis would return today. They were all looking forward to it. The old housekeeper was so excited that tears rolled down his face. He had been waiting at the door since early in the morning. After more than 2 years, the Marquis was finally coming back. In the manor, Ning Shi anxiously walked around. Her delicate doll-like face was also filled with excitement. Beside her, Lu Ruoxi was much quieter. However, the tears in her eyes revealed that she wasn't as calm as she looked on the surface. Just as everyone was looking forward to it, a white figure came from afar. It looked like he was still very far away, but after a few steps, he was already in front of the manor. Brother! Ning Shi was the first to react. She immediately ran out of the door and rushed over. Lan Jun, who came from a dangerous building, had been specially trained in princess etiquette by Zhang Sun for a long time. At this moment, he completely forgot about it and cried without caring about his image. Marquis! Lu Ruoxi walked forward and bowed. Finally, she couldn't hold back the tears in her eyes and dripped down. Okay, everyone get up. Let's go back to the manor first. Ning Chen patted Ning Shi's back and gently pushed her away. He glanced at the group of people kneeling in front of the manor and said, "Yes." Everyone got up. The old housekeeper hurriedly pushed aside the people blocking the way and invited the Marquis into the manor. Very quickly, the news that the Marquis of Jiming had returned to his residence spread to the ears of every noble in the imperial city. Invitations to visit, along with generous gifts, were sent from every residence to the Marquis residence. In a room in the backyard of the Marquis manor, Ghost Girl looked at the deeply unconscious woman on the bed. With a flip of her palm, she circulated her body in a vast amount of true qi continuously poured into the latter's body. After a long time, Ghost Girl stopped and looked at Ning Chen. She said solemnly, "My ghost origin can only help her maintain her life for a while. If you want to save her, you have to think of another way." Chapter 265. Ning Chen walked forward, raised his right hand, and activated the life scroll. Extreme cold air surged out and sealed Meng Xuanji's body in ice again. Unexpectedly, even the ghost girl's ghost origin couldn't save her. This was troublesome. The recovery ability of a Xiantian expert's body was much stronger than a Houtian expert's. However, the prerequisite was that they still had Xiantian strength. Now that Meng Xuanji's Dantian Sea of Qi was broken and her cultivation was scattered, there was no way for her to recover. The scattered true Qi had destroyed too many meridians, and even her internal organs were severely damaged, causing her to be in a coma. Ning Chen thought for a long time. It wasn't impossible to save her, but it wasn't easy. The Eternal Night Cult should have a way to repair the Dantian Sea of Qi. Last time, one of the martial lord's 2 seas of Qi was broken, but when he came out again, he had already recovered. Meng Xuanji had to be saved. Even if they didn't care about their past relationship, a 5th tribulation Xiantian expert was still an indispensable help. The enemies that the Great Xia and the Divine Prefecture were facing were not only the Eternal Night Cult, but also the potential 4 extremities. The Xiantian experts sent by the 4 extremities Holy Lands would definitely try to open a path between the 2 realms. They were truly a great threat. There's one more thing. Underworld Child has already started causing trouble, and the news of your return will soon spread. You must be careful, warned the ghost girl. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. Back then, he had been worried that Underworld Child would become a great threat. When he was breaking through, he chased him for 1,000 miles, but he still escaped in the end. In the past year, there have been a lot of accidents happening to cultivators. Their bodies and blood qi were devoured, causing a lot of people to panic. Although no one saw who did it, I went to take a look. It's definitely a forbidden technique of the underworld, continued the ghost girl. Can you sense his whereabouts? Asked Ning Chen. The ghost girl shook her head and said, it's very difficult, especially in the past few months. I feel that the connection between us is getting weaker and weaker. This means that Underworld Child's strength is gradually surpassing mine. Ning Chen frowned slightly. His previous worries had come true. With the ghost girl's strength, Underworld Child had probably broken through the third tribulation of the Xiantian realm. This was a scourge who was repeatedly deranged and completely unrestrained by morals and ethics. If it was not stopped, once it continued to devour others and grow, the threat it brought would probably not be inferior to the Eternal Night Cult and the Four Supremes. Marquis Bayu sent someone to deliver an invitation and generous gifts. The Marquis of Luoshui sent someone to deliver an invitation and generous gifts. Marquis, at this moment, outside the backyard, there was a constant stream of announcements. Gifts from all the nobles arrived almost at the same time, including many people who had kicked him when he was down in the past. Accept the invitation and return the gift, Ning Chen said calmly. Yes. Outside the courtyard, the old butler hesitated for a moment, but he still acknowledged respectfully and turned to leave. In the room, Ning Chen pondered for a moment before walking out with the ghost girl. There were priorities, and he had to do them one at a time. The problem with the Eternal Night Cult wasn't something that could be solved in a day or two. Right now, the most important thing was to find a way to wake Meng Xuanji up. The second thing was to deal with the Underworld Child. The third and most important thing was to find the person sent by the Four Extremities as soon as possible. In the room next door, Ning Shi was learning embroidery from Lu Ruoxi. This was also a task given by Zhang Sun, so she had to learn it. Ning Chen knocked on the door, then waved his hand and said, Ning Shi, come here. Hearing this, Ning Shi quickly put down the needle and thread that was giving her a headache and ran out in a few steps. Lu Ruoxi smiled bitterly and helplessly shook her head. Why did she feel that teaching Ning Shi embroidery was more tiring than learning it herself? Brother. Ning Shi hugged the arm of the person in front of her and said happily, is something the matter? Ning Chen nodded and softly said, I have something to do in the next few days. If someone comes to visit, I'll leave it to you to receive them. Don't neglect the guests. If there's something you can't solve, go to the palace and ask the Empress. Okay. Ning Shi thought for a moment and obediently agreed. Ning Chen glanced at the ghost girl and said seriously, I'll leave it to you during this time. Don't worry. The ghost girl nodded and replied. After that, Ning Chen's figure flashed and turned into a stream of light that flew towards the academy. In a quiet courtyard of the Heavenly Sky Academy, Bai Yi condensed into a form and walked in after knocking on the door. You're back. The teacher was tidying up his brush and ink at the desk. Yes. Ning Chen nodded. The teacher walked to the bookshelf at the side and took out an ancient golden piece of paper. This is what you left behind before you left. Today, it's time to return it to its rightful owner. Ning Chen stepped forward and waved his hand to put it away. Teacher, I'm here to ask you something. Speak. The teacher said. Will Great Xia perish? Ning Chen asked seriously. Yes. The teacher calmly said. Hearing this answer again, Ning Chen frowned. Great Xia's greatest danger still hadn't passed. The future is vague and difficult to predict. However, it all depends on one's effort. Just do your best. The teacher taught. Junior understands. Ning Chen respectfully bowed and said. After asking what he wanted to ask, Ning Chen bid farewell and left. However, when he walked to the door, he seemed to have thought of something. He paused and asked, Teacher, if there's a gray aura in the boundless righteousness, what does that mean? Bedevilment. The teacher replied. Ning Chen's body trembled and he said in disbelief, Is there a way to reverse it? Losing one's heart due to extreme sorrow, falling into the Azura path and never coming out. The teacher replied. Ning Chen suppressed the shock in his heart, clasped his hands to thank the teacher, and then stepped away. He was too careless. Something must have happened to Xia Zi to lead to this situation. In the Haowu mansion, a woman as beautiful as a flower sat quietly on a swing in the courtyard, looking at the sunset with a beautiful smile. 2 years later, the former 9th princess of the great Xia dynasty was even more beautiful and stunning. Not far away, Xia Zi quietly looked at the woman on the swing. His eyes were full of sorrow. At this moment, Su Yi appeared in the courtyard. Ning Chen walked out and glanced at Xia Zi. Just as he was about to speak, his eyes suddenly trembled. He looked at Xia Xinyu, who was not far away, and the shock on his face could not be concealed. How could the body of 7 fatalities be like this? Marquis Jiming, long time no see. Xia Xinyu smiled and greeted him. In an instant it was as if hundreds of flowers had bloomed. She was dazzlingly beautiful. Ning Chen's feet moved, and he instantly arrived beside her. He grabbed her arm and inserted his vital energy into it. After a while, he looked at Xia Zi and said in shock, When did it start? 2 years and 9 months ago. Xia Zi sighed and said. Does the Empress know? Ning Chen asked in a deep voice. Xia Zi shook his head and said, She has been hiding it from me. At this moment, even someone as smart as Ning Chen did not know what to do. Wasn't the body of 7 fatalities innate? How could it suddenly appear in Xia Xinyu? The last person who had such a body was Fan Lingyue. It was impossible to cure, and it was impossible to even prolong his life. Moreover, the timing was too strange. Fan Lingyue had just disappeared in the heavenly tribulation, and the body of 7 fatalities appeared in the world again. It was too much of a coincidence. In just a few years, the underworld body, ghost body, divine body, and Tao body all appeared one by one. Now, even the body of 7 fatalities appeared in succession at the same time. It was too unbelievable. If it was not for the fact that he did not believe in gods, he would even suspect that there was a god secretly controlling everything. Alright, it's not easy for us to meet, so don't look so sad. Ning Chen, wait here. Imperial brother and I will go to the palace to pay our respects to Imperial mother and then come back to catch up, said Xia Xinyu as she stood up from the swing. It's just paying respects. Let's go together, said Xia Zi softly. No. Xia Xinyu shook her head and smiled. He can't go. If Imperial mother sees us together, she'll nag about our marriage again. You two go. I'll wait for you to come back. Ning Chen nodded. Xia Zi nodded and left with Xia Xinyu. After the two left, Ning Chen stood in the courtyard. With a flip of his hand, he took out the chaos scroll and activated it. Sparkling light flickered, but in the end, it disappeared without a trace. Ning Chen sighed and put away the chaos scroll. He had thought too much. However, if she was still alive, perhaps she would be able to see something. The sun had set and the curtain of night was about to fall. Candles were lit in the Haowu mansion. In the courtyard, 2 people sat in front of the steps and drank wine. Under the cold night sky, a beautiful figure danced under the moon. Her sleeves fluttered, as light as a fairy, as if she would leave at any moment. The 9th princess was good at dancing, but she rarely danced. On the day of her eldest grandson's birthday banquet, her dance was so beautiful that the whole courtyard paled in comparison. The two did not speak. They quietly watched the beautiful figure dance in the courtyard, focused and serious. After one song, Xia Xinyu stopped and walked over. She smiled sweetly and asked, "Was it nice?" "Yes," said Ningchen honestly. "Do you regret it?" Xia Xinyu's eyes flashed with a sly smile. Ningchen was startled, but he immediately reacted. He laughed involuntarily and said, "It's too late for regrets. Where have you been in the past 2 years?" Xia Xinyu stopped teasing him and asked softly. "The four extremes," replied Ningchen. The wine cup in Xia Zi's hand paused. He calmly said, "Tell me about it." Ningchen nodded and gave a simple explanation of what had happened in the past 2 years. He also mentioned the matter of the underworld child. This was a problem that had to be solved as soon as possible. Xia Zi controlled both the imperial court and the Confucian sect. He might be able to help a lot. You're the only one who has seen the four extremes. Only you can handle this matter. As for the matter of the underworld child, leave it to me, said Xia Zi slowly. Ningchen thought for a moment, then nodded. Be careful. The underworld child might have already stepped into the third tribulation of the Xiantian realm. His strength is very difficult to measure. It's fine, said Xia Zi as he drank the wine in his cup. Xia Xinyu was not interested in these so-called serious matters of men. Instead, she was curious about Ning Chen's strange experiences. Do phoenixes really exist? What do they look like? Asked Xia Xinyu with a strange expression. Ning Chen was just about to answer when he suddenly thought of something. He waved his hand and flames jumped. A fiery red phoenix feather flew out and appeared in front of the two. Chapter 266. The phoenix feather was as translucent as blood and was surrounded by tiny red flames. It was extremely beautiful. If Xia Xinyu hadn't mentioned it, he would have almost forgotten that the two phoenixes had given him a phoenix feather. Xinyu, this is for you. Ning Chen handed over the phoenix feather in his hand. What is this? It's so beautiful. Xia Xinyu took the feather. Her beautiful eyes were filled with splendor. A phoenix tail feather, replied Ning Chen. Xia Zi's experience was different from ordinary people. He could tell at a glance that this phoenix tail feather was unusual. This phoenix tail feather is extraordinary. What use does it have? Ning Chen looked at the feather in the flames and transmitted his voice. I'm not too sure either. However, the seven extremities physique belongs to the extreme yin physique. A fire phoenix or even a young divine beast, regardless of whether it's useful or not, there's no harm in you bringing it along. Many thanks, said Xia Zi solemnly. Between you and me, there's no need for thanks, replied Ning Chen. Xia Zi nodded. He raised his cup and clinked it with Ning Chen's before drinking it in one gulp. Ning Chen smiled and also finished the wine in his cup. As the wine cup was hidden, a trace of undetectable worry flashed in the depths of his eyes. His teacher's words made him worried. Xia Zi was a sentimental person. The matter with the third prince had already been a huge blow to him. If something happened to Xia Xinyu, the consequences would be even more serious. The two of them both had their own worries. The empty wine jars around them grew more and more. Xia Xinyu accompanied them until the moon rose to the south. Only then did Ning Chen stand up and leave. The time between friends was always short. After sobering up, they still had their own things to do. He's changed a lot. Xia Xinyu picked up Ning Chen's cup and poured some wine for him. As she drank, she felt a burning sensation in her mouth. Do you regret it? Asked Xia Zi softly. It's too late for regrets. Xia Xinyu smiled. The same answer echoed in the night. Most of the time, even people themselves would forget whether their smiles were real or fake. The Marquis shrine was the most solemn and inviolable place in the Grand Xia. One soldier after another knelt down to welcome the guests. Ning Chen walked in and looked at the rows of Marquis memorial tablets on the stage. His heart was extremely heavy. Behind the 1,000 years of the great Xia, behind the extreme prosperity, were the names that were exchanged with blood and lives. The River of Forgetfulness and Shui, 2 new spirit tablets appeared on the altar. The figures who had fought bloody battles finally put down the heavy burden on their shoulders and took a good rest. Ning Chen silently lit 3 incense sticks. After a moment, he turned around and left. At Heaven's Gate, a white figure flashed past and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The matter of Meng Xuanji and the 4 extremities was the most urgent matter. No matter what, he had to make a trip to the Eternal Night sect. However, the Eternal Night cult was not so easy to break into. He had to be fully prepared. There were thousands of disguise techniques in the world. However, while they could fool ordinary people, they could not fool Xiantian experts. However, there was one person who managed to fool everyone in the world. Duke Shiyu. Back then, when Duke Shiyu changed her appearance, even old eunuch Pei, who was at the Xiantian realm, was unable to recognize her. It was clear how miraculous this technique was. Duke Shiyu came from the Wang family of Donglin. If he wanted to obtain this mystical technique, he would have to make a trip to the Wang family. After the Wang family of Donglin arrived at the capital of northern Meng, the ancient city of Miracle in the desert, they quickly took root there with the help of the imperial family and became the 11th power comparable to the 10 great families. At daybreak, Ning Chen appeared in the city. After 2 steps, his figure disappeared again. In the Wang family, Shui appeared. Before anyone could be surprised, he had already entered the main hall. Marquis Jiming. Some of the important figures of the Wang family immediately recognized the young man in front of them and cried out. Hearing this name, the hearts of the other members of the Wang family trembled and they subconsciously became vigilant. Back then, the Wang family had almost been destroyed by this Marquis Jiming. If the family head had not sent them out in advance, the Wang family would have ceased to exist in this world. Now, the Wang family was under the control of a grand elder. He waved his hand and dismissed the gathered guards. Then, he walked in front of the young man in the hall and cupped his hands. Marquis Wu, may I know the reason for your visit? How could they not lower their heads when they were under someone else's roof? They could not give this young man another reason to destroy the Wang family. I came to borrow the technique Duke Shiyu used to change her appearance, Ning Chen said calmly. Rui technique? The grand elder of the Wang family frowned and explained. This technique does not belong to the Wang family. It belongs to the imperial family of He. Now, only the Empress knows where this technique is. Empress? Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. If that was the case, it was in the hands of Su Fian. In the next moment, Shui disappeared. After Ning Chen left, the grand elder of the Wang family heaved a sigh of relief. Facing a Xiantian master who could attack at any time was not an easy task. He hoped that the Empress could see the current situation clearly and not overestimate herself. In the main hall of the Northern Meng Imperial Palace, Mingyu was wearing a bright yellow dragon robe and a crown on her head. She was seriously listening to the officials below talking about how to govern the country. In the 3 years after the war, Northern Meng had gradually returned to the right track. Below the main hall, civil and military officials were lined up on both sides. However, at the head of the right row, there was an additional chair. The person sitting on the chair was the old minister. In the past 2 years, every time there was a court session, Mingyu would give the old minister a seat so that he could sit and listen to politics. With Northern Meng returning to the right track, the old minister's burden was also lighter. He rarely participated in politics in court. Most of the time, he just listened quietly. However, even so, no one dared to underestimate this seemingly benevolent old man. When the military advisor passed away, Northern Meng was in chaos. It was the old minister and Marquis who used extremely bloody methods to suppress all the rebels. For a time, Northern Meng was silent. No one dared to make any moves. In the sky outside the hall, the void rolled and Ning Chen appeared. He used the Book of Chaos to hide his presence. He quietly looked at the little girl in the hall. A warm light flashed in his eyes. After a long time, the figure in the sky turned and left. In the imperial garden of the imperial palace, the sound of the zither was faint. It carried longing and reminiscence, spreading far and wide. In the garden, the proud snow wintersweet bloomed beautifully. The cold wind blew and the wintersweet flew, drifting away with the sound of the zither. At this time, Sui appeared. Without a sound, she was already 10 zhang away. Su Fian's eyes trembled. The hatred that she had suppressed for 3 years could no longer be concealed. The sound of the zither suddenly changed, filled with killing intent. The wintersweet that filled the garden immediately turned into deadly sharp blades, quickly flying towards the person in front of her. Ning Chen walked forward step by step. He did not dodge. Before the thousands of sharp blades could reach him, they turned into ashes and disappeared between heaven and earth. Su Fian's eyes turned cold. Her left hand slammed on the stone table. The spring lightning flew up. Her right hand gathered energy. 4 strings were plucked together. Immediately, purple lightning appeared again. It was as if 1,000 birds were crying. The sea of flowers in the surroundings was destroyed by the lightning. 4 strings cry world, purple lightning frightens the gods. The powerful move turned the entire imperial garden into a purple lightning world. The thunder shook the heavens. The spring lightning quickly spread in all directions. Ning Chen's body flashed and instantly appeared in front of Su Fian. He pointed his sword. In the sky full of snow, the lightning dissipated and the 7 strings stopped playing. How could this be? Su Fian's heart trembled. She wanted to pluck the spring lightning again, but her hands were sealed by the wind and snow. For a moment, she was unable to move. Can we sit down and talk? Ning Chen calmly asked. What is there to talk about between us? Su Fian coldly snorted. I want to see your imperial family's Rui technique. You can state your conditions. Ning Chen calmly said. Can I even take your life? Su Fian coldly sneered. Miss Su, although this negotiation is asking for a sky-high price and sitting on the ground to haggle, if you block all the ways to haggle, I don't think it will be a good thing for you. Ning Chen indifferently said. Su Fian forcibly suppressed the hatred and anger in her heart. Her mind gradually calmed down. His words were not wrong. The difference in strength between them was too great. Right now, her only bargaining chip was the Rui technique. She had to make good use of it. The imperial garden quieted down. Su Fian was still weighing the conditions. She had not spoken the entire time. Ning Chen was also not in a rush. He calmly waited. The Rui technique was very useful to him. It was the key to his ability to deal with the Eternal Night God sect and the 4 extremities. For Ming Yu's sake, as long as Su Fian's conditions were not too excessive, he was willing to settle things peacefully. If you want the Rui technique, that's fine. But I want you to seal your cultivation base. In the future, when you are in the sky realm, receive 3 of my moves. After those 3 moves, if you don't die, I'll hand over the Rui technique. After a long time, Su Fian made her decision. She slowly raised her head. Impudent. However, as soon as she finished speaking, a clear but intimidating voice rang out from the entrance of the imperial garden. Following that, several figures appeared in front of the 2 of them. At the very front was Mingyu. Her beautiful face was filled with anger. Behind her, several figures followed, not even daring to breathe loudly. Who gave you the guts? How dare you neglect my guest? Mingyu said angrily. Su Fian stood and gracefully bowed. She calmly said, "I wouldn't dare. Your Majesty might have misunderstood. We were only exchanging pointers." Ming Yu's gaze turned to the nearby Ning Chen. Excitement flashed through her eyes. But with so many people around, she suppressed it. "Greetings, Your Majesty." A smile flashed through Ning Chen's eyes. He cupped his hands. Seeing the person in front of him not kneeling, a young official in the crowd immediately became angry. But just as he was about to open his mouth, he was slapped on the head by the old official. "Dispense with the formalities." Ming Yu's expression returned to normal. She calmly asked, "Just what is going on?" "It's just as the Empress said. It's only exchanging pointers." "I hope Your Majesty can agree," said Ning Chen seriously. Ming Yu was a bit worried. But due to her trust in the former, she still nodded. "Permitted." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Su Fian respectfully bowed. Her eyes instantly became cold. She stood up and walked to the side. With a wave of her hand, the spring lightning flew up. As it rapidly spun, purple lightning descended from the heavens. Ning Chen dispersed the spiritual energy around him. His cultivation was still at the 9th rank. There was no need for him to seal it. Su Fian used her full strength. The purple lightning merged into one and crashed into the person in front of her. Immediately after, a shocking explosion rang out. Sand and stones flew everywhere, covering the sky. "That's the first move. You still have 2 more. Chapter 267. Within the dust, there was no change in the voice. It was as calm as usual without the slightest hint of emotion. Su Fian sneered. She was not the least bit surprised that he could withstand her first move. She also did not expect that her first move would be able to seriously injure him. After the dust settled, Ning Chen calmly looked at the girl in front of him. He also wanted to see just how much she had grown in these past few years. After the first move, the second move was about to begin. Suddenly, Su Fian's right hand's 5 fingers all began to bleed. The blood dyed the 5 zither strings and a blood-red mist instantly spread out from her body. When the blood lightning appeared, the air pressure in the courtyard changed. A power that did not belong to the Hotian realm exploded. The blood-red lightning unceasingly surged. The ground between the two people quickly collapsed and sank down several zhang. The shocking power caused the generals behind Ming Yu to be on guard. They took a step forward and blocked in front of her. The current empress's martial path was not ordinary. This was something that many people knew. But no one had thought that she would be this strong. Within the blood lightning, Su Fian pushed her body to the limit. Borrowing the power of the lightning from the previous 2 moves, using her own blood qi as a guide, she forcefully plucked the 5 zither strings. She once again used the imperial family's legacy technique. 5 strings break the heavens, spring lightning shakes the world. 5 strings were released, the sky and earth changed color. With a clear whistle, Su Fian's qi instantly rose from half-step Xiantian to the Xiantian realm. In the instant that he broke through the sky, the blood lightning became several times stronger, causing an even more terrifying phenomenon of the earth collapsing. The 4 generals immediately retreated with Ming Yu, the old minister, and the others to avoid this terrifying celestial power. Facing this killing move that Su Fian had prepared for a long time, Ning Chen's eyes flashed with a strange light. Although this move borrowed the power of the previous 2 moves, no matter what, it could still be considered as entering the Xiantian realm. For a half-step Xiantian to be able to do this, it was indeed extraordinary. Out of his agreement with his opponent, Ning Chen no longer stood still. With the limit of the 9th rank, he activated the life scroll in his body and formed a sword with his fingers. As the frost surged, the sword intent spiraled up and blocked around his body. The thunder that broke the heavens crashed into the spiraling sword intent. Immediately, Ning Chen's entire body was submerged by the blood lightning. The dazzling light covered everything, making it difficult for people to see clearly. In the distance, Ming Yu's expression changed. She looked at the lightning, extremely nervous. "Not bad, but it's a pity." A calm voice sounded, and the roaring lightning stopped altogether. In the next moment, a majestic sword will spread out, and the blood lightning that filled the sky was instantly dispersed. With a bang, it dissipated between heaven and earth. The figure that was still intact shocked everyone present. Such a powerful move actually had no effect at all. Su Feiyan's state of mind was similarly shaken. She had thought that he would be able to block it, but she did not think that it would be so easy. "You still have one last move," said Ning Chen seriously. It was rumored that when all 5 strings of the spring lightning were used at the same time, it was extremely difficult to block. He had seen it himself, and it was indeed not bad. However, what he wanted to know now was what level the spring lightning's 6 strings could reach. The Heshi dynasty had already been destroyed for 1,000 years. Now, the only one who could play the spring lightning was Su Feiyan. Disregarding personal grudges, he actually really wanted to see if the Heshi imperial family's martial arts were as powerful as the legend said. Su Feiyan clenched her fists until they were pale. Her beautiful eyes were filled with unwillingness and helplessness. However, after a moment, it was replaced by an even stronger hatred and anger. The spring lightning flew up, and Su Feiyan's body exploded to the limit. Her hair immediately burst open, and a dazzling light crazily surged. She actually wanted to absorb the surrounding spiritual qi to break through her shackles and stay in the Xiantian realm forever. The light that soared into the sky brought with it the power of lightning. Under the influence of hatred and anger, Su Feiyan forcefully entered the Xiantian realm. Her body suffered a backlash, and blood fell like rain. The Heshi dynasty's only imperial bloodline displayed a shocking amount of willpower. She forcibly endured the pain of her body's backlash, and once again rushed to the limit. 6 strings were released, and the entire imperial garden rumbled. Seeing this, Ning Chen waved his hand and sent Ming Yu and the others out of the battlefield. 6 strings destroy the world, black and yellow tyrannical. The earth crumbled and flipped from the front of Su Feiyan's body to the surroundings. The imperial garden seemed to have suffered a heavenly tribulation, and was completely submerged by the black and yellow lightning. The destructive power made all the citizens of Bei Meng Imperial City feel it clearly. They looked towards the imperial palace, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Ning Chen raised his hand, and streaks of sword intent flew out, colliding with the lightning. In an instant, the sword intent shattered and dissipated. "Oh!" Ning Chen's eyes revealed a look of admiration. The power of 6 strings did not disappoint him. Frost surged, and the blade and sword gathered. In the midst of the rapid rotation, blue and dark yellow light flourished. Ning Chen condensed his qi with his fingers, and streaks of light streaked across the sky. With the limit of the 9th grade, he activated the resonance of heaven and earth technique. The spiraling blade and sword flew out, colliding with the raging lightning in the sky. The collision of 2 extremes was earth-shattering. After a terrifying loud sound, the aftermath of the destruction spread out in an instant. There was nothing left in the surroundings of the imperial garden, and it was completely razed to the ground. Only the wild sand in the sky could be seen, and everything was annihilated. Ugh! Su Feiyan was forced back several steps by the aftermath of the collision. She spat out a mouthful of blood and staggered unsteadily. The backlash of her jinqi was difficult to suppress. However, her eyes were still firmly fixed in front of her, waiting for the result. At that moment, in the midst of the dust, light footsteps could be heard. A white figure slowly walked out, and blood blossomed on his right shoulder. However, that was all. Ning Chen raised his hand and touched his right shoulder. Silver light shone, and the wound quickly froze. The martial arts of the imperial family of Heshi were indeed unique. The full power of 6 strings should have been able to reach the 5th tribulation level. Unfortunately, Su Fian's cultivation was too low. Although she had forcefully opened the 6th string, she could only use less than 20% of her strength. Su Fian had already done well, but she had chosen the wrong conditions. Ever since he had been stranded in the 4th realm, his cultivation had not been able to fully recover. This forced him to get used to the fact that his cultivation could not keep up with his realm. As for how to fight with less strength, no one understood it better than him. 3 moves have passed. Please fulfill your promise, said Ningchen seriously. How could that be? The cruel reality was hard to accept. Su Fian's feet were unsteady. Under such a huge blow, the air around her became even more chaotic. The backlash of her Jinshi leapt out from her body, bringing with it a beautiful waterfall of blood. The spring lightning was completely dyed red. Drops of blood dripped down, and the pitiful cries continued. Ningchen glanced at the bright moon in the distance and sighed in his heart. He took a step forward, his sword finger condensed into frost and pointed at Su Fian's Dantian Qi Si. Immediately, a vast amount of energy surged into Su Fian's body, forcefully suppressing the backlash of qi. The battle had ended. The 4 generals and the old minister quickly rushed over. When they saw Ningchen healing the empress, their faces were filled with gratitude. They were not idiots. They knew very well about the enmity between the empress and the Xia Jiming Marquis. The reason the latter was willing to help was probably because of his majesty. The imperial garden had been completely destroyed. It was a scene of desolation. There was not a single place that was intact. The shattered earth showed the intensity of the previous battle. The innate ability of this person was truly astonishing. After a long time, Ningchen stopped. He looked at Mingyu and said, "She is fine now. However, she will only wake up in a few hours." Mingyu nodded and ordered, "Men, send the empress back to Qiyu Palace and take good care of her." Yes. A few palace maids and eunuchs who had been waiting for orders hurried forward and respectfully received the order. "You all can also leave," Mingyu said to the officials behind her. Yes. The 4 generals and the old minister bowed respectfully and then left. In Qianyuan Palace, the palace maids and eunuchs who were in charge of Mingyu's daily life were all dismissed today. In the tightly shut room, the little girl's tears fell down like a pear blossom in the rain. Her beautiful little face immediately became like a little kitten. "All right, don't cry." Ningchen gently wiped the tears off little Mingyu's face and coaxed her. However, it would have been better if he did not coax her. Once he coaxed her, her tears fell like rain. Her little dragon robe was wet and he could not wipe it in time. Ningchen's heart ached. He pulled the little girl into his arms and softly comforted her. "You are not allowed to leave today." Mingyu sobbed. "All right. You are also not allowed to leave tomorrow." Mingyu continued. "All right." Ningchen thought about it. The Rui technique was not something that could be learned in a day. Thus, he agreed. When Mingyu heard him agree so easily, her little face lifted. She probed, "I am not leaving the day after tomorrow." Seeing the little girl's cautious appearance, Ning Chen's heart ached. However, he could not nod anymore. "Mingyu, be good. I still have important things to do. I cannot delay it for too long. However, I will come to see you often." Ning Chen said gently. "You must keep your word." Mingyu was a little disappointed, but she still obediently nodded. She did not make trouble for no reason. She wiped her tears and said, "I must keep my word." Ning Chen replied. Only then did Mingyu stop crying. She revealed a smile that resembled a little kitten. She was charming and very cute. Ning Chen rubbed the little girl's hair and smiled. "You are already a big girl. You are still crying. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? They wouldn't dare." Little Mingyu wrinkled her nose and said arrogantly. Heh. Ning Chen chuckled. Indeed, no one would dare. Northern Meng's little emperor was about to grow up. 11 years old was no longer a child in the divine continent. Your Majesty, the Empress has woken up. Something has been sent over. Outside the palace, a gentle-looking palace maid walked over and said respectfully. Come in. Mingyu said. The palace maid pushed open the door. After seeing Mingyu's appearance, she immediately turned around and closed the door. This is Zi Jing. She used to be Sister Lingyue's personal maid. Mingyu said softly. Ning Chen nodded and carefully observed the maid in front of him. Since Fan Lingyue left her behind for Mingyu, there should be no problem in terms of trust. Marquis, Her Majesty the Empress sent someone to give this to you. Zi Jing bowed in a natural and graceful manner, and then handed over a jade slip as she said. Ning Chen withdrew his gaze and took the jade slip from Zi Jing. He narrowed his eyes. He had finally obtained the Rui technique. With this, he would be able to find a way to enter the Eternal Night God sect and find a way to repair his Dantian. On the other hand, the person who had reached the four extremities was most likely a martial lord. He could also use this opportunity to find traces of that person. Chapter 268. Qianyuan Palace. After the sun set, the lights gradually lit up. Zi Jing had arranged a residence for Ning Chen, right next to Mingyue's. There were many rules in Qianyuan Palace, especially after nightfall. Other than Zi Jing, the other palace maids and eunuchs were not allowed to enter Qianyuan Palace as they pleased. Ning Chen's impression of Zi Jing was not bad. She was natural and unrestrained, a woman who could hold her own. The person that Fan Lingyue chose was indeed different. Zi Jing. Ning Chen spoke. Marquis. Hearing the call, Zi Jing walked forward and bowed respectfully. Ning Chen looked at the woman in front of him and said seriously, I have something that I want to ask your opinion on. Marquis, please speak. Zi Jing said softly. You are Mingyue's only personal palace maid, and also the only person that I can trust. So, I want to leave a spiritual imprint in your body. If Mingyue encounters danger in the future that she cannot resist, you can activate this imprint. At this point, Ning Chen's tone changed and he said seriously, however, with your current cultivation, once you activate this imprint, you will have to pay an extremely heavy price. It may even be your own life. Zi Jing did not think too much and directly knelt down. She said calmly, please, Marquis. No more consideration. Ning Chen finally confirmed. This servant has already thought it through. Zi Jing replied. Ning Chen nodded and did not say anything else. He raised his right hand, and immediately, the wind and snow between the two began to spin rapidly, forming a large whirlpool of 10 feet wide. The powerful aura caused the sky to change color, turning it into a white world of ice and snow. After a moment, the wind and snow quickly shrank. A drop of abnormally red blood flew out from Ning Chen's finger and slowly entered between Zi Jing's eyebrows. The silver light gradually disappeared. After doing this, Ning Chen put down his hand and said, all right, get up. I have left my martial comprehension in your spiritual sense. I hope it will help you break through to Xiantian in the future. Thank you, Marquis. Zi Jing got up and after saying her thanks, she turned and walked towards Qianyuan Palace, continuing to do what she needed to do. Looking at the leaving figure, Ning Chen nodded again. It was indeed not bad. With this woman by Mingyue's side, he could rest assured. As the night deepened, Ning Chen returned to his room. Just as he took out the jade slip that Su Fian had given him, he heard a knock on the door. Creak, the door was pushed open, and little Mingyu walked in wearing a pure white cotton shirt. When she saw Ning Chen in the room, she said sweetly, I want to sleep here. Ning Chen put down the jade slip in his hand and stepped forward to close the door tightly, blocking the cold wind that constantly blew in. It was winter now, and the night was very cold. The little girl's body was weak, and she couldn't withstand the cold. "You're already so old, yet you still want to sleep with me. Aren't you embarrassed?" Ning Chen took the blanket from the bed and wrapped it around the little girl. "I want to sleep here," Ming Yu said stubbornly. Ning Chen had no choice but to agree. He sat by the bed and helped the little girl dry her wet hair bit by bit. Soon after, he let her lie down and leaned against the headboard with his clothes on. He patted her lightly and coaxed her, "All right, go to sleep. Tell me a story." Ming Yu squeezed her head into the former's chest and requested. Ning Chen thought about it for a while, then he recalled the stories his mother told him during his childhood and told them to the little girl. Time gradually passed, and little Ming Yu's breathing gradually stabilized as she fell asleep. Ning Chen carefully removed the little girl's hand that was wrapped around him. After covering her with the blanket, he walked over to the table and picked up the jade slip he had just put down. Using his spiritual sense, he slowly imprinted the cultivation technique recorded in the jade slip into his mind. This would be the key for him to enter the Eternal Night sect in the future. With this Rui technique and the Chaos Scroll that could conceal his aura, even experts of the three calamities wouldn't be able to easily discover him. After reading it, Ning Chen walked out of the room and went to the courtyard. He began to cultivate according to the method recorded in the cultivation technique. In a nearby room, Amethyst raised her head and glanced at the figure in the courtyard. She then continued with what she was doing, no longer paying any attention to him. In the southeast of the Grand Xia, the former sect, one pavilion, and two aristocratic families were now a thing of the past. 3 years ago, the Donglin Wang clan was nearly uprooted overnight, causing this enormous clan that had prospered for 1,000 years to suffer a great loss and gradually withdraw from the stage of history. In the current southeast, the sect, one pavilion, and one aristocratic family were divided into 3 parts. While the Grand Xia was preoccupied, they were rapidly growing stronger in a low-key manner. However, there were always all kinds of unexpected variables in the world. The growth of the sect and the increase in the number of martial artists attracted the most terrifying source of disaster. The underworld child. This was a demon that had truly walked out of hell. Wherever the underworld child passed, there would be a scene of devastation burned by the flames of hell. Human life, ethics, and rules had never held any meaning to the underworld child. A variable that even the netherworld couldn't tolerate. Once it appeared in the southeast, it brought endless calamity. A third tribulation connate expert that exceeded common sense was immeasurably harmful to the human world. The flames of hell burned through this divine land, bringing about the most merciless suffering. Countless people died in the sea of flames. The resentment was shocking, and no one was able to escape. Ha! Insane and crazy laughter rang out between heaven and earth. The struggling state of the people in the flames before they died gave the demon a brief moment of interest. However, a moment later, it disappeared like smoke in thin air. His handsome face once again regained its cold indifference, and he continued to walk forward in boredom. Half a day later, the underworld child arrived at the sword sect. Boundless flames of hell descended at the same time, and the cruelest massacre unfolded. Hundreds and thousands of disciples of the sword sect fell into pools of blood. Not a single one survived. The 2 ancestors of the sword sect woke up from their slumber. They were both experts that had broken through to the connate realm. One of them had even reached the peak of the 3rd tribulation. The 2 of them joined forces to fight the underworld child. However, as the saying went, virtue is 1 foot tall, the devil is 10 feet tall. In the end, the 2 of them were nailed to death in front of the sect by their own swords. Swords? Ha, they're just useless pieces of metal. The underworld child mocked indifferently. With a wave of his hand, all the swords in the sword sect snapped and scattered on the ground. Not long after, the underworld child left. The two ancestors of the sword sect and the elders with the highest cultivation in the sect who had died in battle had their cultivation and vitality completely devoured. In the end, they were burned to ashes in the flames. The destruction of the sword sect caused a huge uproar in the southeastern region. An atmosphere of fear continued to spread. All the sects and aristocratic families felt insecure, afraid that they would be the next to be targeted. The underworld child's existence was now known to the world. However, the flames of death were still rapidly spreading across the land. In just a few short days, over 4 large sects and aristocratic families had been destroyed, and 2 cities had been turned into seas of flames. After hearing this shocking news, Xia Zi finally understood why Ning Chen was so afraid of this person. "Royal brother, you can go. Don't worry about me," said Xia Xinyu with a gentle smile. Xia Zi gently nodded. With a wave of his hand, silent autumn waters flew out from the sword platform. With a single step, she turned into a streak of light and disappeared into the distance. In the northern Meng imperial court, Ning Chen, who had stayed for 2 days, also chose to leave. From beginning to end, he didn't look back. Even if his heart was as hard as steel, it couldn't withstand the tears in the little girl's eyes. He was afraid that if he looked back, he wouldn't be able to harden his heart. On the western battlefield of Grand Xia, the Marquis of Victorious Return and the Marquis of Plainclothes were working together to deal with the main forces of the Evernight army. The battle was getting more and more intense by the day. Including the northwestern and southwestern battlefields, the 3 battlefields had a total of 6 Martial Marquis of Grand Xia. On this day, the 7th Martial Marquis had also arrived. This was the first time Ning Chen, Marquis of Victorious Return, had officially met. The 2 strongest Martial Marquises of Grand Xia didn't exchange greetings as expected. After nodding to each other, they directly turned to the war. On the western battlefield, although the Blackwater Army and the Marquis of Plainclothes' 100,000 soldiers were blocking the majority of the Eternal Night Cult's forces, it was already extremely strenuous. Fortunately, Grand Xia's reinforcements were also constantly coming to the battlefield, and only then were they able to resist the invasion of the Evernight army. Currently, the 2 biggest problems are the individual strength of a martial monarch, and the divine martial army under Zhong Qianqiu's control, Marquis of Victorious Return said seriously. Ning Chen thought for a moment, then said, "In the future, there might be worse situations." "What do you mean?" Marquis of Victorious Return frowned and asked. Ning Chen simply explained the 4 extreme Holy Lands' deliberate plan to invade the Divine Continent. This was the problem he was most worried about. After hearing this, Marquis of Victorious Return's frown deepened. Now, there really was a wolf in front and a tiger behind. It couldn't get any worse. "You think the Eternal Night Cult will help the 4 extreme realm masters open the passage between the 2 realms? There are too many uncertain factors in this plan, and it might not be a good thing for the Eternal Night Cult," Marquis of Victorious Return said in a deep voice. 3 years ago, the 4 extreme realm masters had most likely already made contact with the Eternal Night Cult. However, at that time, Fan Lingyue was present, so the Eternal Night Cult didn't need to help the 4 extreme realm masters, nor did they dare to. Now, Northern Meng has already retreated, and the war between Grand Xia and the Eternal Night Cult has already begun. Judging from the strength displayed by both sides, if the Eternal Night Cult wants to take down Grand Xia, they will have to rely on external forces. At this point, Ning Chen turned his gaze to the Eternal Night Cult in the west, and said with a serious expression, "Moreover, even if the 4 extreme realm masters descend, the first thing they will have to deal with will be Grand Xia, which occupies more than half of the Divine Continent. The burden on the Eternal Night Cult will be greatly reduced, and they might even be able to temporarily hold back and reap the benefits. In addition, there is another matter that I have always been very concerned about, and that is the 3 disasters expert of the Eternal Night Cult who has yet to appear. If they are hiding their strength, there is really no need for them to do so at this point in the war. The most likely possibility is that the Eternal Night cult has an even more important matter to deal with, and they are tying up this person's energy. The enmity between Grand Xia and the Eternal Night cult has been accumulating for thousands of years. I really can't think of anything else that the Eternal Night cult cares about more than this war. However, one thing is for sure, if they only rely on the Eternal Night cult's current strength, what will the final result of this war be? After saying this, Ning Chen turned his gaze to Marquis of Victorious Return, and said seriously, if Grand Xia wins this war, what will happen to the Eternal Night cult? Or perhaps, how will Grand Xia deal with the defeated Eternal Night cult? Cut the weeds and eliminate them completely, Marquis of Victorious Return said without the slightest hesitation. Chapter 269. Ning Chen nodded. I think so too, and I'm sure the others feel the same. The Grand Xia and the Eternal Night Church have a fundamental difference in beliefs. Adding on the enmity that has existed for 1,000 years, there's no turning back now. I think the Eternal Night Church would rather use the tiger to devour the wolf than completely disappear from the world after this war. The Grand Xia's 1,000 years of brilliance has been too dazzling. In comparison, the Eternal Night Church has been much more low-key. The goal of the Four Extremities is the entire divine continent. Although they will eventually threaten the Eternal Night Church, that will be after the Grand Xia is destroyed. Before that happens, the Eternal Night Church will instead become the biggest beneficiary. Of course, the precondition is that the Eternal Night Church's Three Calamities expert no longer exists, or that he's really held back by other matters and can't act in a short period of time. Otherwise, with 2-3 calamities, plus one who's proficient in formations and curses, the current balance will immediately be broken. There's no need to open a path between the two realms. Hearing Ning Chen's analysis, Marquis Triumphant Return fell silent. Although it was only a guess, the truth wouldn't be too far off. Now it seemed that no matter which possibility it was, it would be very unfavorable for the Grand Xia. Is there any way? Marquis Triumphant Return asked. There are 2 suggestions, but they're not easy. First, find the person sent by the Four Extremities as soon as possible. Second, eliminate the martial monarch with all our strength, Ning Chen said solemnly. The existence of a martial lord was an enormous threat to the Great Xia. The title of the number 1 expert of the Divine Prefecture was not undeserved. Although one of his Dantian's Qi Cs had been destroyed by Prince Yan, it had already recovered. Moreover, that battle had already happened 3 years ago. The martial lord's strength must have increased again. One could imagine how difficult it would be to eliminate him. However, if they could truly eliminate the martial monarch, that would be the best result. Not only would they be able to severely damage the Eternal Night Church's strength, they would also make the possibility of the Four Extremities descending even more remote. Marquis Triumphant Return lightly shook his head and said, it's very difficult. Let's not talk about the former for now. The matter of eliminating a martial monarch is indeed very difficult. The strength of a martial monarch is already completely different from 3 years ago when he just came out of seclusion. Now that his realm has completely stabilized and coupled with his practically undying body in dual Qi C's physique, his battle strength is even more terrifying. It's not something an ordinary 3-disaster realm expert can compare to. Ning Chen pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, I'll think of another way. During this period of time, I hope that Senior Marquis Triumphant Return can keep a close eye on Martial Lord's movements. If Martial Lord intends to go to Ascension Valley, I hope that Senior can stop him as much as possible. Understood. Marquis Kai Xian nodded. For the rest of the time, Marquis Victorious Return went over the specifics of the battle, including the distribution of their forces, the strength of each of the enemy's champions, the characteristics of their troops, and so on. Ning Chen listened from the side and quickly imprinted this information into his mind. After a long time, Marquis Triumphant Return explained everything clearly, and Ning Chen also understood most of it. Soon after, he bowed respectfully and said, thank you for your guidance. I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first. Be careful. Marquis triumphant returned didn't ask any more questions. Ning Chen nodded and didn't delay any longer. He turned around and left. In the following 10 days, Ning Chen seemed to have disappeared from the world once more, and no one saw any trace of him. Zhong Qianxiu made several predictions, but because of the Chaos Scroll, he was unable to find anything. The battle on the western battlefield was becoming more and more intense. The Eternal Night cult intended to pull apart the battle lines, and then use their absolute advantage to tear open an opening and wait for an opportunity to advance east. The Godly Might army became a sharp knife, causing Great Xia to be extremely fearful. Although they sent a large number of troops to surround and block them, they suffered crushing defeats time and time again. The 4 Confucian sect heads and many Confucian sect experts were forcefully transferred to the western battlefield by Xia Mingri's imperial edict to assist the Bai Marquis in resisting the Godly Might army. The battle turned heaven and earth upside down. Ning Chen used the Chaos Scroll to conceal his aura, then quietly observed each of the Eternal Night cult's champions and chose the person to replace them. It could be seen that the Eternal Night cult's division of labor was very clear. The martial lords were responsible for fighting outside, and Zhong Qianxiu would choose to guard the shrine most of the time. Unless it was a crucial battle, he wouldn't come out. Because of this, Ning Chen was even more suspicious that the Eternal Night cult had an even bigger conspiracy. They were restricting part of the cult's power, and this power was even more than he had imagined. No matter what, he had to enter the Eternal Night cult as soon as possible and find out how deep the waters were. The Eternal Night cult's heavy cavalry camp, Tongguang's champion tent. The heavily injured champion couldn't fight for a short period of time, and was escorted back to the shrine by 500 heavy cavalry. Tongguang was good at fighting, and ranked second among all the martial lords' champions. However, his opponent was the Bai Marquis of Great Xia. Although every martial Marquis of Great Xia was full of karma, and it was very difficult for them to enter the Xiantian realm, there was no need to doubt their battle strength, which was close to Xiantian experts. The strongest martial Marquis of Great Xia, such as the Marquis of Wangchuan and the Marquis of Blood Robe, had even fought with the 3 Disasters realm for a short period of time. Even if they were defeated in the end, it was enough to show the strength of the martial Marquis of Great Xia. The Bai Marquis had been stuck in the half-step Xiantian realm for a long time. If he wanted to break through to the Xiantian realm at all costs, he could have done so long ago. However, just like the martial Marquis of Great Xia, the Bai Marquis also chose to stay in this realm forever, and didn't fight. Once a Marquis was conferred the title of Marquis, every martial Marquis represented not only by themselves, but also by the tens of thousands of soldiers under their command, and even more so by the territory of Great Xia behind them. Ning Chen already had a general understanding of every champion from the Marquis of Victorious Return. In addition to his recent observations, when Champion Tongguang was about to be sent back with heavy injuries, he had already locked onto his target. On the way back, Ning Chen was still carefully observing Champion Tongguang's every move, trying his best to remember every habit and detail. In the carriage escorted by 500 heavy cavalry, Champion Tongguang had been feeling anxious the whole time. He didn't know why, but he couldn't sense any danger. He repeatedly asked the troops to stop and be on guard, but in the end, he didn't find anything. After walking and stopping for a few days, Champion Tongguang's intuition was proven to be overthinking for the last time. One of the leaders of the heavy cavalry weighed his words and tactfully said, "Lord Champion, we have to hurry. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for us to return to the divine sect before sunset today." Yes. Once again, he didn't find anything. Champion Tongguang had no choice but to temporarily suppress the uneasiness in his heart and nod in response. Tongguang didn't know that this stop was his last time in the world. From now on, Tongguang was no longer Tongguang. The divine sect was already not far away. Not far away, the void rolled and a white figure walked out. In the next moment, it disappeared again. No one noticed that the curtain of the carriage moved slightly. After that, there were no more abnormalities. In the southeastern territory of Grand Xia, the underworld child's calamity was becoming more and more terrifying. Even the large sects with Xiantian cultivators found it difficult to resist. Rivers of blood flowed. Under the moonlight, another city turned into a sea of fire. The once flourishing Prajna city was now completely destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives in the sea of fire. Miserable cries and resentment soared to the sky. In the sky, the underworld child in his dark blue battle armor revealed a crazy smile. He was once again in high spirits, admiring the miserable situation below. Hee, ha. His crazy laughter spread across the sky, shaking the earth. The houses below couldn't withstand it and collapsed with a rumble. In the southwest, Xia Zi, who had been chasing after the underworld child, finally sensed the abnormality in the distance. His expression changed slightly and his figure flashed, rushing over. Save them! Inside the flames and outside the flames, cries for help could be heard everywhere. However, the heavens couldn't see them, and even if they did, they would only be merciless and ignore them. At this moment, a figure wearing a black imperial robe rushed over. His overwhelming righteous aura filled the world. It was so dazzling. It's the Crown Prince. It's King Haowu. Outside the Sea of Fire, many people recognized the figure in the moon. In the past, when Xia Zi was still a prince, he had been sent by Emperor Xia to the southeastern border to resist the invasion of the Meniang kingdom with the Marquis of loyalty and courage. When he passed by Sanskrit city, many common people saw this amiable and approachable prince on the streets. Crown Prince, save them! Save them! The figure outside the Sea of Fire knelt down and kowtowed continuously, begging. Disappointing. When the underworld child saw the person who came, his interest that had been piqued with great difficulty immediately turned dull. He took a step forward and quickly left. Xia Zi's figure flashed past. When he heard the cries of the people below and saw the underworld child gradually leaving, he didn't have time to think. He waved his hand and threw silence of autumn waters down. The Howran sword fell, and sword intent spread out. Overwhelming righteous aura spread out, trying its best to resist the flames from hell. In the sky, the figure wearing the black imperial robe had already disappeared and was rushing in the direction of the underworld child. Save me! The people in the flames didn't know what was going on. They began to despair and kept struggling, screaming miserably. Save them! Crown Prince! Seeing their loved ones being devoured by the flames, the people kneeling outside the flames also despaired. Their hatred and resentment became more and more unforgettable as they screamed miserably. Xia Zi, even if I become a malicious spirit, I will still curse you. The final voice in the flames was filled with resentment. It was mournful and malicious, causing people to shiver. Evil was endless, and more people would suffer. However, how could the people outside the Sea of Fire care? Disappointment and despair turned into malicious curses that resounded throughout the Sea of Fire. In the distance, Xia Zi finally caught up to the underworld child. Overwhelming righteous aura enveloped his body as he began to fight. This was a battle between the peak of evil. The moment they clashed, it was already a life and death battle. Foolish person. Even after losing your sword, how much can you still do? The underworld child knocked back the person in front of him with a palm strike. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and sneered. It's enough to kill you. Xia Zi waved his hand to seal the wound on his left shoulder and took a step forward. Overwhelming righteous aura erupted from his body and rose to its peak. It blossomed with a dazzling brilliance in the night sky. His black hair broke free from its restraints and fluttered in the wind. When their palms collided, the sky collapsed and the earth caved in. The 9 heavens trembled and countless gods were startled. It was as if they were being struck by a heavenly tribulation. Huge rocks swirled in the air as they were swept by an even more terrifying shockwave. Ha! The devil's laughter echoed between heaven and earth. The one who had lost his mind was surging with evil aura and devil flames. Chapter 270. Within Hanya city, an ancient sword was stabbed into the ground. Boundless righteous energy continuously spread out, suppressing the spreading flames within the city. However, the flames within the city were too big and couldn't be suppressed in a short period of time. Extremely far away, the battle had already reached its climax. Palm after palm struck out, palm after palm collided, bringing forth waterfall after waterfall of blood. The blood-soaked figures didn't know pain. One was crazy, the other was firm. They constantly crossed each other, gradually becoming indistinguishable. Only the splashing blood was so dazzling, and it blossomed into the most gorgeous style under the night sky. Xia Zi, who had lost his sword, was still extremely powerful. His heart was unshakable as his righteous energy reached its peak. His attacks were swift and fierce. He was determined to leave this calamity here forever. Underworld Child had the underworld origin protecting him. His recovery speed far surpassed ordinary people. He was injured but not dead, making him extremely difficult to deal with. Have you run out of strength? Don't disappoint me. Their injuries became more and more serious as they crossed each other. The heartless person's laughter also became crazier and crazier. The desperate battle dyed the two people's bodies with blood. Their fists and palms shook the earth, causing the world to lose its light. Boundless learning. Xia Zi didn't waste any words. He flipped his palm, causing his righteous energy to continuously rise. A golden ancient scroll unfurled between heaven and earth. Immediately, the dazzling golden words emitted an extremely bright light, causing the pressure to multiply. The Confucian school's secret art had once again appeared in this world. Underworld flame burning the heavens. Underworld Child saw this and used his ultimate move as well. Underworld flame burning the heavens surged out from his body, turning from a deep blue to a boundless black. Its terrifying might seemed to be able to devour heaven and earth. The collision of their ultimate moves caused the world to lose its color. A huge explosion resounded through the night sky. After one move, the outcome of the battle would be decided. Boundless righteous energy devoured the demonic flames and ultimately suppressed the demonic flames. Underworld Child retreated a dozen steps as a terrifying wound appeared on his chest. His heart was heavily injured, causing blood to spurt out. On the other side, Xia Zi also suffered a backlash from the demonic energy and retreated 3 steps. His mouth was red as he was heavily injured. Unfortunately, you still can't kill me. The smile on Underworld Child's handsome face didn't fade. He wasn't the slightest bit affected by the outcome of the battle. His feet moved, and his figure retreated, disappearing into the night sky in the blink of an eye. Just as Xia Zi was about to give chase, he staggered and vomited a mouthful of blood, dyeing the ground before him red. After the great battle, it was a scene of desolation. The undying body shocked everyone. Even though half of his heart had been smashed away, he was still difficult to kill. The retreating Underworld Child only left behind words of mockery and glaring blood. The path of evil slayer was so difficult. This incomparably bitter battle was just the beginning. Seeing that it was already too late to chase after Underworld Child, Xia Zi was worried about the commoners in the Sea of Fire. Ignoring the injuries on his body, he quickly rushed toward Hanya city. In the blazing city, mournful screams rang out one after another. Resentment, hatred, despair, all kinds of atmosphere spread inside and outside the Sea of Fire. The true colors of human nature were undoubtedly revealed. With a flash of his body, he entered the Sea of Flames and stood beside the Autumn Water Sword. Both of his hands flipped, and one seal after another rose up, drawing upon the power of heaven and earth. Immediately, a sweet rain fell, quickly extinguishing the dancing flames. Blood flowed out from the corner of Xia Zi's mouth once more. His heavily injured body drew upon the power of the heavens and earth, which immediately worsened his injuries. "It's raining, it's raining." The people outside the flames shouted excitedly and crazily. "The heavens have eyes." Women and children knelt on the ground, constantly kowtowing, thanking the heavens for their mercy. The flames gradually extinguished, and the girl closest to Xia Zi saw the truth. She was both grateful and anxious at the same time. "Crown Prince, my little brother is still trapped inside. Please save him." Hearing that, Xia Zi stepped into the ruins that had just been extinguished. Not long after, he found an unconscious little boy in a corner of a building. He waved his hand to shake off the obstacles in front of him and carried the little boy out of the disaster zone. "He's fine now." Xia Zi used his true qi to prolong the little boy's life before handing him over to the girl. "Thank you, Crown Prince." The girl gratefully received her little brother. The rain that fell allowed the destroyed Hanya city to have a trace of life. Xia Zi used all of his strength to save one life after another. However, how much could a single person save? In the end, countless people were buried in the sea of flames, unable to be saved. "I'll beat you to death, you heartless demon." The man who had lost his son had a sinister expression. He picked up a burning stick and smashed it at Xia Zi. The furious people had lost their rationality and were no longer afraid. Facing the crown prince they once respected, they revealed the ugliest side of human nature. One person, two people. Gradually, the countless survivors who had lost their loved ones began to pick up rocks and throw wooden stakes. Curses, insults, and extreme viciousness. The ugliness of human nature was completely revealed at this moment. "Stop. It's the crown prince who saved us." The girl's face was filled with anxiety as she continuously tried to stop the crazy people. However, since they had already gone crazy, how could a weak girl stop them? The young girl was pushed to the side, and her anxious cries were drowned out. There was no longer a trace of a ripple in her voice. Rocks flew over, but they were all blocked by Xia Zi's protective true qi. Xia Zi was covered in blood as he walked forward step by step. His heart was throbbing with pain. He blamed himself for not being able to kill them, and even more so for not being able to save them. Insults rang out in Xiao Chen's ears. Curses fell on his body, making his heavily injured figure even heavier. The Eternal Night God sect had two huge palaces in the west. The martial monarchs of the first palace were outside, so there was no one on the throne. The current Eternal Night God sect was overseen by Zong Qianxiu, who was in charge of handling the matters of the two palaces. Zong Qianxiu didn't care too much about General Tongguang being sent back with heavy injuries. After ordering people to take good care of him, he continued to do what he needed to do. In the second palace, Zong Qianxiu pushed open the door behind the throne and walked forward step by step. After walking for an unknown distance, the scene suddenly changed, and a huge demonic statue appeared in front of him. In front of the demonic statue, there were numerous stone coffins, and their auras were heavy and powerful. This was especially so for the one in the middle, which gave off a terrifying pressure that caused the surrounding space to violently distort. After countless years of accumulation, the Eternal Night God sect's foundation had reached an unimaginable level. Especially in terms of the number of peak experts, even the invincible Grand Xia couldn't compare. Unfortunately, due to special reasons, these experts were still in a deep sleep. Just like the martial monarchs and Zong Qianxiu, they weren't allowed to be awakened unless absolutely necessary. Zong Qianxiu stood in front of the devil statue for a long time. Only when the two divine martial guards arrived did he open his mouth. "How is it?" "Palace Master, Xia Zi went to the southeast of Grand Xia, but there aren't many clues as to where Jiming Marquis is." Hua Zhuang replied. "Palace Master, these two people are huge problems for the sect. We should get rid of them as soon as possible." Canfeng suggested. Zhong Qianqiu nodded. Since Xia Zi's tracks are clear, let's start with him. Subordinate requests to battle. Hua Zhuang said calmly. Oh. Are you confident? Last time, you lost terribly. Zhong Qianqiu's eyes flashed with a strange light. I won't let you down. Hua Zhuang said firmly. Go, don't disappoint me. Zhong Qianqiu waved his hand. Hua Zhuang bowed respectfully before turning around and leaving. Palace Master, Xia Zi's strength isn't something a normal Xiantian expert can compare to. Hua Zhuang might not be able to complete the mission. Canfeng said with a worried expression. No problem. Zhong Qianqiu didn't mind. I have my own plans. Hearing that, Canfeng fell silent and didn't say anything else. He just quietly stood to the side. The first shrine of Eternal Night was surrounded by large and small palaces. From one of them, a general of Tongguang in blue clothes walked out and observed the position of each palace without leaving a trace. The highest palace was undoubtedly the legendary first shrine of Eternal Night. As for the palace in the distance that wasn't inferior to the first shrine, it should be the second shrine overseen by Zhong Qianqiu. There were countless palaces in the Eternal Night sect. Since the appearance of the second shrine, the area within dozens of miles was covered by large arrays. As long as someone entered, it would immediately attract attention. General of Tongguang. After seeing the figure in front of the shrine, the patrolling guards saluted one by one and continued to walk forward. Ning Chen nodded and didn't speak. He looked at the first shrine in the distance, his eyes flickering. The cultivation art that he wanted to restore his Qi might be there. He must find a chance to go in. Just as Ning Chen was distracted, the ground of the entire Eternal Night sect suddenly shook. The large arrays flickered as if something terrible had happened. In the abyss of darkness, in front of the golem, beside the sarcophagus in the middle, a magnificent sarcophagus swayed, causing the surrounding heaven and earth to resonate. Beside Zhong Qianqiu, Sanfeng's expression changed slightly, and he subconsciously took a step back. Seeing this sarcophagus move, even Zhong Qianqiu frowned, revealing an indecipherable expression. Welcome, Sect Maiden. After a brief moment of shock, Canfeng immediately knelt down and bowed respectfully. So it's Canfeng. Get up, Zhong Qianqiu. Looking at you, it seems you don't want to see me wake up. A pleasant voice came from the sarcophagus, carrying a charming and elegant aura. The contradictions perfectly merged together. Sect Maiden must be joking. Of course, Zhong Qianqiu welcomes Sect Maiden's awakening. It's just that now isn't the time for you to wake up, Zhong Qianqiu said indifferently. Ha! A chuckle came from the sarcophagus. I've been in there for too long. It's a bit stuffy, so I'm ready to come out for a walk. Zhong Qianqiu didn't say anything more. He knew very well that the person in the sarcophagus was not someone he could control. In the next moment, a powerful aura spread out in the darkness, causing the surrounding ground to shake even more violently. The gorgeous stone coffin slowly opened, and amidst the rumbling sounds, a beautiful figure walked out. However, before he could see her face clearly, she had already disappeared from the abyss of darkness. Temple Master. Canfeng glanced at the person who left, and a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. Zhong Qianqiu raised his hand to stop the former from continuing to speak. He turned and walked towards the temple, his eyes slowly narrowing. The birth of the Sect Maiden was indeed a bit unexpected. This woman's behavior was unpredictable, and she was very difficult to control. However, there was no doubt about her strength. If she could be used well, she would be a great help to the sect. It seemed that he had to rearrange his future plans. Chapter 271. In front of Tongguang Palace, Ning Chen also only saw a beautiful figure flash by. Before he could even see her face, she had already disappeared. Her powerful aura was extremely abnormal. If he had to describe it, it would be like this world. Although it was powerful, it was very difficult to sense. The divine sect's sudden abnormality not only attracted Ning Chen's attention, but the remaining generals and attendants also revealed strange expressions. Clearly, there weren't many people who knew what was going on. Tongguang, you've yet to recover from your injuries. Don't walk around too much in case you catch a cold. A man in azure-green battle robes walked over with concern. General Tan Zhu. The patrolling guard respectfully bowed. Tan Zhu nodded. His elegant expression contained some gentleness, giving people an indescribable feeling of warmth. It's fine. I've been lying down for too long, so I came out to get some fresh air, said Ning Chen calmly. Heh, you're still the same. You can't stay idle for even a moment, laughed Tan Zhu. Ning Chen didn't reply. He didn't want to reveal his identity so quickly. Once you're better, we'll exchange some pointers. I still have matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first. Tan Zhu smiled and walked away. Ning Chen nodded. After the former left, he frowned slightly. So that general who hadn't appeared this entire time was him. General Tan Zhu was the martial lord's #1 general, but he rarely appeared outside. Every time the martial lord went out to battle, he would stay behind to protect the divine sect. Based on the other general's tone, this person's strength was at least on the level of a martial marquis. As long as such a person didn't commit crimes, it shouldn't be a problem for him to break through to the Xiantian realm. Once he broke through to the Xiantian realm, his strength would rapidly increase. His future was immeasurable. General Tan Zhu walked over from the second divine sect. Looking at the figure in the hall, he respectfully bowed. Greetings, sect master. Tan Zhu, the sect maiden has already awakened. Someone needs to fill her position. This is a divine heaven pill. Take it and quickly break through to the Xiantian realm. After saying that, Zhong Qianxiu waved his hand, and a divine heaven pill flew into the former's hand. Immediately, boundless medicinal energy surged through the divine sect, causing rays of light to appear extremely extraordinary. Understood. Tan Zhu accepted the order, put away the divine heaven pill, and left. In front of the Tongguang Hall, Ning Chen was just about to return to the hall when he saw Tan Zhu return. Her green battle robes fluttered in the wind. She was still very far away just a moment ago, but when he regained his senses, she was already right in front of him. Looks like you're about to break through. Congratulations, said Ning Chen with narrowed eyes. It was not that he could predict the future, but he could tell based on the enormous medicinal power that Tan Zhu was emitting. There were countless types of medicinal pills in the world, but a medicinal pill with such a majestic aura could only be the sacred medicine of the eternal night cult, the divine heaven pill. In this world, any pill with the word Tian in it was extraordinary. For example, the Xiantian pill of Grand Xia and the Buddha heavenly pill of Mijia Mountain. However, compared to the divine heaven pill, there was still quite a gap between these two pills. Tan Zhu smiled helplessly and said, "It's hard to say whether it's a good thing or not. Now that Zhongnu has woken up, someone needs to fill the empty spot in the abyss of darkness. I don't know when I'll be able to come out again." Ning Chen's heart skipped a beat, but he suppressed his desire to continue asking. He calmly said, "No matter what, I still have to congratulate you for being able to take such a crucial step." "Oh, thank you," Tan Zhu replied with a smile. After chatting for a while, she walked towards her palace. Once Tan Zhu left, Ning Chen immediately returned to his palace. He had never heard of Zhongnu and the abyss of darkness. Since Tan Zhu had told him this, Tongguang should also know about this. He couldn't continue asking, or he would definitely be suspected. It seemed the eternal night cult was hiding even more secrets than he had imagined. In the southeastern region of the Grand Xia, over 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. After a life-and-death battle, the underworld child had been heavily injured and had completely disappeared. Xia Zi had been searching for him for over 10 days, wanting to get rid of this calamity once and for all, but he had been unable to find any trace of him. His body was becoming increasingly weak. Just as Xia Zi was about to return to recuperate, the weather changed and 5 figures appeared in the sky. Their auras were connected, and they were abnormally powerful. "It's you." Xia Zi recognized the woman in front of him. "Xia Zi, you won't be able to escape today." The moment she said that, Hua Zhuang's figure quickly closed in, and the halberd in her hand slashed down. Her slender body had the strength of 10,000 kilograms, and when the halberd smashed down, it was earth-shattering. Xia Zi was injured, and when he blocked the attack, he couldn't withstand the huge force. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth and dyed his hair red. The other 4 divine martial guards didn't hesitate and immediately surrounded him. Their blades shone brightly. The green and white battle suits shone brightly, and with the support of a special formation and their tacit cooperation, the combat strength of the 4 divine martial guards soared. Each of them wasn't any weaker than a Xiantian expert. At the same time, in the second shrine of eternal night, Zong Qianqiu, who had been waiting all this time, made his move. His hands formed many complicated seals, and a strange spell appeared in the world. In an instant, in the distant battlefield, the battle suits of the 5 people shone brightly, and their auras surged, increasing their power by several times. With the addition of the spell, the encirclement became even more intense. The halberd light was as heavy as a mountain, and the blade light was as dense as a net, making one feel as if they couldn't break through. Hua Zhuang's eyes were calm and cold. He waved the halberd in his hand, and as the light shone, it could split mountains. Silence of autumn water welcomed the enemy. The sword was like autumn water, and as the sword light shone, there were no weaknesses. Battle after battle, the unavoidable slaughter caused this battle to be destined to be abnormally tragic. Xia Zi fought 1 against 5, and his righteous aura was eye-catching, showing no fear at all. His blood-dyed black robe was once again dyed red, piercing and sad. First, he was injured, and now he was being forced to kill. Xia Zi's body was heavily damaged, and he couldn't use his full strength. However, great Xia Haowu wasn't weaker than anyone, and his fighting spirit rose. The 5 of them were also injured. Even with their special techniques, they still couldn't gain much of an advantage against the man in the battle. As their moves intersected, blood dyed their battle suits. Looking at the valiant figure in the battle, Hua Zhuang's eyes shone brightly. The halberd in his hand became heavier, and he pushed his cultivation to the extreme, wanting to defeat the person in front of him. The other 4 seemed to have sensed it, and their sabers changed rapidly, turning into an all-out attack. The close attacks left bloody marks on the black robe. Xia Zi shouted coldly, and his eyebrows furrowed. His genuine qi suddenly erupted. "You've gone too far." The righteous aura erupted, and a dazzling gray color became clearer than before. Silence of autumn water changed from its usual mercy to a ruthless azure killing move. The sudden change made the 5 of them even more injured, and blood splashed everywhere. In the second divine palace, Zong Qianqiu sensed the change in the battle, and his hands formed seals again. With the help of the 4 people in the distance, he summoned strange magical beasts. In the battle, the talismans that had been prepared flew out from the 4 people's bodies, and flames soared into the sky, turning into 4 flame generals to assist in the battle. The change in the battle tilted the unequal balance again. 9 against 1, Xia Zi was sweating profusely, which couldn't be washed away in this cold winter. The dancing autumn waters streaked across the air with sharp killing lights. Even though they were trapped here, their fighting spirit did not diminish. The low-key and kind Grand Xia Martial King had always displayed incredible strength. Compared to him, all the geniuses in the world seemed laughable. Zong Qianqiu, who was in the distant divine palace, saw Xia Zi's powerful side through the perception of a spell. The killing intent on his face became even stronger. If such a person was left alone, he would become another legend of Grand Xia in a few years. Xia Zi's final trump card was revealed. Another talisman flew out from his robe, and the evil god's body appeared in the world. The green-faced, fanged evil god's battle axe fell with a heavenly might that shook heaven and earth. Feeling the killing intent, Xia Zi changed the direction of his sword, and the revolving sword shook off the people around him. His sword soared into the sky, and a golden splendor soared into the sky. The two extreme moves collided, and the sky collapsed. The surrounding figures were all sent flying, and the sand was dyed red with blood. Ugh! Amidst the dust, Xia Zi's blood gushed out like a fountain. He staggered, unable to suppress the injuries in his body. The evil god in the distance was affected by the sword light. It couldn't withstand the overwhelming sword power, and it shattered, dissipating between heaven and earth. Kill! The four immediately rushed forward again. Together with the four flame divine generals, they were determined to get rid of the divine sect's greatest threat. Hesitation flashed through Hua Zhuang's eyes, but it disappeared after a moment. Holding the halberd in his hand, he rushed forward. Heavy breathing sounds came one after another. However, the battle didn't stop for a moment. The saber light and halberd shadows closed in, making it hard for people to be distracted. The divine sect's calamity came after the evil god. Xia Zi couldn't suppress the hatred in his heart, and his azure state became even stronger. His black hair was dyed with frost, and it fluttered in the cold wind. It was so dazzling. It was anger toward the evil god, and hatred for his own powerlessness. The sword is eternal, the evil god hasn't been eliminated, and the spring and autumn sighs. In extreme anger and hatred, the Confucian faction's evil slaying move that had been sealed for 1,000 years appeared for the first time. Xia Zi injected all his vital energy into the autumn water sword. Instantly, the autumn water sword was dyed red, and the extreme move was unleashed. A move that could destroy heaven and earth caused the entire heaven and earth to be without a second color. The blood light and sword intent covered a radius of 10,000 feet. The four flame divine generals were the first to bear the brunt of the attack, shattering into pieces. Following which, the four divine martial guards were pierced through by the terrifying blood light. Their bodies collapsed, and they shattered into pieces. Hua Zhuang raised his halberd to block. With a keng, the halberd flew out of his hand, and he was forced back several steps. His green and white battle robe was dyed red, and there wasn't a single part of it that wasn't damaged. This was the first time in 1,000 years that someone had cultivated the evil slaying move. The moment it appeared, even gods and ghosts were shocked. After using the forbidden move, Xia Zi's last bit of strength was used up, and his consciousness started to blur. However, how could the body of a king fall? The autumn water sword stabbed into the ground, forcefully supporting the unyielding pride of a king. Great Xia's Haowu king was never weaker than anyone. It was like that in the past, and it was still the same today. What a shocking expert. Just at this moment, a gentle and beautiful figure stepped into the battlefield. Looking at the battle that had already ended, a bright light flashed across her beautiful eyes. In the next moment, Luofei carried the nearly unconscious Xia Zi and turned into a streak of light. Hua Zhuang stumbled forward. He wanted to chase, but he couldn't. In his anger and unwillingness, he could only watch as the two of them disappeared. Chapter 272. In the arena of the Eternal Night Divine Sect, two figures were facing each other. One was wearing a green battle robe, while the other was wearing a light blue battle robe. The battle between the first and second-ranked generals of the First Palace immediately attracted the interest of many deacons and elders of the Divine Sect. They all came to watch. Tongguang, please, Tan Zhu said with a smile. Please, Ning Chen said calmly. It was hard to refuse Tan Zhu's challenge. After the last battle before the Xiantian realm, there would be no more generals of Tan Zhu in the first divine palace. Tan Zhu waved his hand and a green ancient sword appeared beside him. He reached out and grasped it. One of the 3 legendary swordsmen of the divine sect reappeared. His green radiance illuminated the world. Ning Chen drew his sword to meet the enemy. The long and narrow blade shone with a cold light. In an instant, the sword and the blade clashed. The elegant sword intent was extraordinary. He used 70% of his moves and 30% of his defense. The sword momentum was endless. He was undefeated. Ning Chen was already Tongguang. He used the long sword in his hand. The cold blades intersected and the blade light reached its peak. General Tongguang's saber is even sharper than before, one of the spectating deacons said from outside the sparring field. Yes, but General Tan Zhu is still the strongest among the generals. It's not likely that General Tongguang will win, an elder of the divine sect analyzed calmly. I wonder if I'll have the chance to see General Tan Zhu's aqua shadow body this time, the previous person sighed. It'll be difficult. General Tongguang shouldn't be that strong yet, the elder of the divine sect next to him replied. The conversation between the two was also a question that the surrounding people wanted to know the answer to. Outside the martial hall, everyone was seriously watching the increasingly intense exchange. They wanted to see how the strength of the 2 battle generals would change after a year. While Ning Chen was facing the enemy with his long sword, he was also paying attention to the people around him. He didn't care about the outcome of the battle. He was more interested in learning more information. His Xiantian spiritual sense covered the entire arena. Everyone's words fell into his ears. This was the first time he heard the name Aqua Shadow Body. He couldn't help but wonder. Ning Chen suppressed his spiritual sense and increased the speed of his sword. He suppressed the enemy with every move and forced the person in front of him to fight back. A strange light flashed in Tan Zhu's eyes. Seeing that the former had used his full strength, she no longer held back. She took a step forward and her figure turned illusory. Amidst the flowing water, she had already disappeared. Ning Chen narrowed his eyes and concentrated on observing the mysteries of the movement technique. As the sword and saber clashed, it was hard to distinguish the real from the fake. As the cold saber slashed across, the watery light shattered and dissipated. The exquisite movement technique was mesmerizing. The combination of speed and dexterity displayed the might of a top-notch martial art. With ear-piercing clanging sounds, the sword and saber had already exchanged dozens of blows. A moment later, a dark green longsword silently appeared in front of Ning Chen's chest. It was only half a step away when it stopped. The battle ended. General Tan Zhu won again. I lost, said Ning Chen calmly. You've improved a lot this year. General Tan Zhu put away his sword and smiled warmly. Unfortunately, I'm still no match for you, Ning Chen replied. I'm 2 years older than you, so I have a lot of advantages. With your perception, you will surpass me sooner or later. After saying that, Tan Zhu paused for a moment and then continued, this may be the last time we exchange pointers. I'm about to step into the Xiantian realm and fill the position of sect girl. You will fight with Lord Wu in the future, so be careful. Ning Chen nodded and replied. The two parted ways and returned to their respective palaces. The deacons and elders around the arena also dispersed and returned to their positions. 10 days later, the second divine palace of Eternal Night issued an order for General Tongguang to leave for the front line as soon as possible. After receiving the order, Ning Chen was silent for a moment. Although he hadn't found a better opportunity, he knew that he couldn't wait any longer. Late at night, Ning Chen, who had returned to his original appearance, used the chaos volume to hide his aura. According to his observations these days, he quickly rushed toward the first divine palace. The patrolling guards of the divine palace didn't notice him at all. A third tribulation Xiantian expert was definitely not something these ordinary guards could discover. Ning Chen knew that Zhong Qianxiu had been guarding the second divine palace and wouldn't appear under normal circumstances. So, as long as he didn't get close to the second divine palace, he was safe for the time being. In front of the majestic first divine palace, two peak 9th level generals were guarding the door, observing every movement around. At this moment, a sword light flashed. The two generals only saw a blur in front of their eyes, and then they lost consciousness. At the same time, several experts of the divine palace hidden in the dark had blood gushing out of their throats. They opened their mouths, but no words came out. The door of the divine palace opened, and Ning Chen walked in. He scanned the place with his spiritual sense and walked forward step by step. The enormous palace was now empty, and the throne was completely empty. The hall was cold and cheerless. There was nothing valuable in it. Ning Chen didn't stay long and quickly walked to the back of the hall. The figure who suddenly appeared didn't even have time to say anything before his throat was slit by a sword and he fell into the dust. Even in death, he couldn't close his eyes. He couldn't understand how the person in front of him had broken into the divine sect and how he had deceived so many people. There were no inborn experts in the divine palace. The strongest was only peak 9th level or half-step to inborn. However, such people posed no threat to Ning Chen. They didn't even have the chance to speak in shock. It wasn't a long way, but there were fallen figures everywhere. Blood flowed and dyed the long corridor red. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard. The scene around Ning Chen suddenly changed. Countless figures of white bones appeared in all directions and quickly approached him. The densely packed white bones stretched as far as the eye could see. There were thousands of them, which made one's scalp tingle. Is this an illusion? Ning Chen's expression didn't change. He stabbed the long sword in his hand into the ground and pressed down with his right hand. A strong sword will came out. The white bones around him suddenly turned into ashes and disappeared. However, after the white bones disappeared, thousands of nether soldiers gathered between heaven and earth. The decaying spears were full of yin qi and surrounded him again. Ning Chen's expression became serious. He had seen this scene in the nether world 3 years ago. He didn't expect to see it again today. This time, there was no little white horse to help him break the formation. Ning Chen held his sword and turned into a flowing light that disappeared into the nether soldiers. In an instant, his sword moved like the wind, and broken bodies and soldiers flew everywhere. Clang! The sword and halberd collided. The headless horseman appeared in the formation and waved his halberd to stop the former's advance. The 4 halberds cooperated seamlessly, and the horse's hooves stomped on the ground. Looking at the nether soldiers surrounding him again, Ning Chen didn't want to delay any longer. Frost condensed on the long sword in his hand, and snowflakes fell from the sky. He used the emotion art when it's about to snow and opened up a path. 3,000 miles of sword snow. The sharp sword will came out with extreme cold air. The surrounding nether soldiers and headless horsemen were frozen in an instant. In the next moment, the sword will exploded, and the frozen figures shattered. At the same time, the illusion formation couldn't withstand the extreme power. The 4 formation beads shattered, and the surrounding space returned to reality. Ning Chen didn't know if the commotion just now had alarmed the other members of the sect. He didn't dare to delay and rushed forward. In the second hall of eternal night, in front of the crisscrossing chessboard of heaven and earth, Zhong Qianxiu was deep in thought. Just as he was about to place a piece, a cold light flashed in his eyes and his figure disappeared. In the first hall, after passing through the illusion formation, Ning Chen finally entered the core hidden place of the Eternal Night sect, the 100 Revolutions Heavenly Pavilion. The Heavenly Pavilion was very spacious, and there were countless scriptures inside. However, the truly precious martial arts were protected by restrictions and were easy to identify. Ning Chen spread out his spiritual sense and soon found what he was looking for. He swung his sword and broke the restrictions, picked it up, and left. At this time, the Chaos Codex in Ning Chen's body trembled violently as if it had sensed something. Heavenly Scripture. Ning Chen's expression changed. Following the feeling, he slashed away the obstacle in front of him and rushed forward. Behind the 100 Revolutions heavenly pavilion was the Void Shrine. In the boundless land of chaos and nothingness, silver light reverberated between heaven and earth, forming a world of its own. In the void, an ancient scripture shimmering with black light floated up and down. It was as black as ink, swallowing the light around it like a black hole. The Eternal Night scripture was said to have recorded the history of the Eternal Night sect. After seeing the ancient scripture in the void, the Chaos Codex in Ning Chen's body trembled even more violently. Shocked, his figure flashed, and he immediately rushed forward. However, just as he approached, the Eternal Night scripture shone brightly and blocked his path. In the past, in order to prevent Fan Lingyue from using the Chaos Codex to spy on the secrets of the Eternal Night sect, the martial monarch had personally set up restrictions around the scripture. Ning Chen sensed a powerful aura rapidly approaching from afar. He no longer hid it. His aura rose, and he gathered all his energy on his sword. A loud explosion resounded. Cracks appeared on the light of the restriction, and then it collapsed with a bang. Ning Chen went forward and grabbed the Eternal Night scripture. However, he didn't expect that at this moment, a terrifying aura that he had never felt before would descend. A terrifying palm broke through the void. Ning Chen didn't have time to dodge the palm that came without warning. He held his sword horizontally to block, but his sword was broken and blood gushed out. His white body flew out covered in blood. The extremely terrifying expert who had been heavily injured in one move hadn't shown himself yet. Just the move he had left behind was enough to display a shocking strength. So it's you. What a great burden. At this moment, Zhong Qianxiu rushed over. Seeing the heavily injured figure, his killing intent surged. Ning Chen didn't say anything. He endured his heavy injuries and turned around to escape. You think you can escape? Zhong Qianxiu snorted coldly and chased after him. A green talisman flew out from his hand, and a sea of lightning descended. Ning Chen waved his sword to block, and the broken sword continued to pierce through the lightning. With a bang, the white figure fell from the sky and smashed into the palace below, raising a cloud of dust. Zhong Qianxiu walked down from the sky and waved his hand to disperse the lightning and dust. However, the figure was nowhere to be seen. Hall Master Canfeng and the 5 divine martial guards rushed over and asked. Search each hall. He's heavily injured and can't run far. Zhong Qianxiu said coldly. Yes. Canfeng and the 5 divine martial guards respectfully accepted the order. Behind a hall not far away, Ning Chen covered his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. His entire sleeves were dyed red, and he stumbled as if he could faint at any moment. The power of that palm was so terrifying. Chapter 273. In the Sandalwood Palace, a majestic aura kept shaking and was extremely unstable, alarming everyone in the sect. It's General Sandalwood. The deacons and elders of the sect looked over in shock. The next moment, a green beam of light shot up to the sky, shaking the earth and space. Countless people in the Divine Prefecture looked over in shock. Did the Eternal Night sect have a new Khanate expert? Behind the Sandalwood Palace, Ning Chen was immediately sent flying by the sudden explosion. His injuries worsened and blood stained the ground. When it rains, it pours. The worst luck came to the worst place. This strange movement immediately attracted the attention of Zhong Qianxiu and the others, who quickly rushed over. Ning Chen got up and staggered away from the most dangerous place, rushing to other places. However, he didn't go far before he saw residual wind and the others blocking his way. Ning Chen knew that if he didn't fight his way out, there would be no way out. He gathered ice and snow on the broken sword in his hand and made the first move. You're really reckless. How much strength do you have left? Residual wind waved his sword to block the attack. He was not at a disadvantage at all. Ning Chen suppressed the heavy feeling in his head and waved his sword to attack, trying his best to move forward. How sad, Marquis Jiming. Zhong Qianxiu walked over and said lightly, one wrong move and the whole game is lost. If it were any other day, he might not be able to stop the person in front of him if he wanted to leave, but it was different now. That palm could even injure a three disasters expert. He was a little surprised that this person was not dead. However, the result was the same. A seriously injured Marquis Jiming of the Great Xia could not escape. At the same time, on the bed in the Haowu Palace, Xia Zi, who had been in a coma for several days, had his aura become chaotic again. Not far away, Luofei's expression changed and she quickly walked over. She turned over her palm and injected a vast amount of vital essence into his body. However, it didn't have much effect. His injuries worsened day by day and he was already at the end of his life. After using the forbidden move, his blood and qi dissipated and it was difficult to reverse. His body was also gradually dispersing. All the elixirs had been used up, but it still couldn't stop his vitality from fading. The strands of snow-white hair in his black hair were so dazzling. The demonic tribulation of his Tao heart might only end when he died. Beside the bed, Xia Xinyu watched as her brother grew weaker day by day. Tears fell from her eyes, and her heart felt as if it was being stabbed by a knife. Yet, there was nothing she could do. The Eternal Night cult was being invaded by a great enemy. Upon receiving the order, the guards put on their armor and rushed over. Leading them were several peak 9th grade generals, and they blocked off the path in front of them. Ning Chen had no way out. Can Feng and the 5 divine martial guards surrounded him while Zhong Qianxiu was at the side. They were going to cut off the strongest wing of Great Xiao. Today, it was impossible for him to escape. Earth Scroll. Facing such a desperate situation, Ning Chen was not willing to give up. He used a palm to force back the 2 divine martial guards in front of him. He stabbed his sword into the ground, and the scroll of earth appeared once more. Boundless sword lights flew out from the ground and rushed straight up. Suddenly, within 100 feet, the sword lights were boundless like a reverse torrent. Hundreds and thousands of divine guards suffered the most horrifying massacre. Blood splashed all over the sky as countless casualties were inflicted. Can Feng and the 5 divine martial guards forcefully blocked the attack. Their mouths were dyed red, and they were forced back several steps. After that strong move, Ning Chen's consciousness became blurry. He forcefully resisted the feeling of fainting, and he stepped on the ground, turning into a streak of light as he charged out of the gap that he had opened up with much difficulty. Pointless struggle. Chase. Zhong Qianxiu scoffed coldly. His body flashed as he swiftly chased. Can Feng and the other 5 suppressed their injuries and chased forward. Ning Chen, who was close to fainting, became more and more unstable. He only had a strong will to live supporting him. He knew that if he gave up, he would not have another chance. Kill. The divine sect guards charged at him endlessly. Ning Chen used his last bit of consciousness to wave his sword and charge forward. His white shirt was dyed with who knows how much blood. Some belonged to others, some belonged to him. The strongest will to live turned the broken sword in his hand into the scythe of the death god. There was no longer any difference between emotions and heartlessness. Only killing his way out was his only thought. A flirtatious female general blocked his path. However, she only saw a sword light flash in front of her eyes before she lost all consciousness. She fell to the ground, no different from the numerous dead divine sect guards. The blood-dyed road, the cold moon in the sky. In this world where lives were like grass, it was so difficult to live every moment. His beating heart became faster and faster. The golden phoenix blood continued to spread. After a full cycle, it became 30% stronger. The strong will to live in this desperate situation increased the growth of the phoenix blood. His body that had undergone nirvana was the body closest to the phoenix bloodline. The moment it was awakened, the cry of the phoenix rose to the heavens. The remaining 4 drops of phoenix blood were led by the golden phoenix blood in his heart and entered his body. Instantly, a red glow spread out, and his blood started to recover. His heavily injured body was recovering at a visible rate. However, time waited for no one. How could the continuous killing allow him to stop? The blade light and sword shadows that chased after his life could not be seen clearly. Ning Chen did not know where he had walked to and where he was. Only the sword that he waved was the only thing he could rely on. The sharpness of the sword was bone-chilling. The broken sword was dyed in fresh blood. At this moment it was comparable to a god weapon. Everywhere it passed, broken limbs flew. Remnant wind chased up, and the sword light stabbed toward his back. Ning Chen instinctively turned around and waved his sword. With a pang, he was forced back several steps, and blood splattered out of his mouth. The 5 divine martial guards' blade light appeared once more, sealing all directions and cutting off his path of survival. The formation patterns on the green and white armor lit up, and with the buff of an external force, the sharpness in his hands was several times stronger than before. Zhong Qianqiu laughed coldly, activating the curse to raise the 6 of them to the limit. This battle would totally end the legend of knowing destiny. More and more divine sect guards appeared. Peak grade 9 generals gathered from the various halls to work with Remnant Wind and the 5 divine martial guards to kill the great Xia Jiming Marquis. The life and death crisis was hard to solve. At this very moment, a green body shot out from the Sandalwood Palace. The moment it appeared, the water light flickered, and a green sword light slashed out with the color of death. The sudden change caused the 2 divine martial guards to fall to the ground. Their throats were slit by a sword. Hold on. Sandalwood held on to Ning Chen, whose consciousness was slowly fading, and said solemnly. Traitor. Zhong Qianqiu was furious. He waved his hand, and 4 talismans flew out. The ground rumbled, and 4 stone giants appeared. Their giant fists smashed down, shocking the heavens. Sandalwood's expression was really solemn. He stepped back, and his body flashed. His body was like a water light, and he dodged the giant fists. The water light shadow displayed a special ability, the combination of speed and agility. Blades and swords could not touch his body. Why? Killing intent jumped in Zhong Qianqiu's eyes as he asked coldly. The heart of Kaiying has never betrayed Great Xia. Sandalwood said calmly. It's you. Zhong Qianqiu was stunned, and rage surged. He flipped his hands and formed seals. Instantly, lightning descended from the sky, turning into an ocean of lightning. Then die. The furious second hall master used his full strength for the first time, controlling the lightning to kill the previous martial Marquis of Great Xia. The third tribulation and the first tribulation were on completely different levels. Sandalwood stepped on the water light shadow, dodging the lightning bolts. He did everything he could to fight for a chance for the junior on his back. He was very happy to see that the junior had already surpassed them. Too many martial marquises had died, and he could no longer watch as a junior died in front of him. The water light shadow flashed, but it was difficult to dodge the endless lightning. Finally, a bolt of lightning struck the water light. However, it was not an illusion. Sandalwood staggered and was injured. Zhong Qianqiu's body flashed, and he stepped into the ocean of lightning. He clenched his hand, and a long spear condensed from lightning appeared. The clash of swords and spears was a one-on-one battle. With the absolute suppression of realms and the interference of spells, Sandalwood immediately fell into a disadvantage. Even if the water light shadow was unparalleled, it could not change the huge difference in realms. A moment later, Sandalwood's right rib was swept by the lightning spear. Blood spurted out, dyeing his clothes red. In order to find a chance for survival, Sandalwood did not want to continue fighting. He retreated as he fought. However, the moment he left the ocean of lightning, a cold sword light mercilessly came for his life. The sword that had been waiting for a long time appeared behind him, wanting to end the lives of 2 generations of martial marquises. In that moment of crisis, Sandalwood could not dodge in time. He leaned to the side and grabbed the sword, using his body to block it. "Idiot!" Remnant Wind coldly shouted, and the sword light changed direction, stabbing into Sandalwood's chest. Sandalwood groaned and retreated 3 steps. Blood flowed out of his left hand and chest. "Today, none of you will be able to leave," said Zhong Qianqiu coldly. Sandalwood swung his sword, and his figure flashed, once again fleeing out of the Eternal Night God sect. Final struggle. Zhong Qianqiu quickly gave chase. Behind him, Remnant Wind and the other 3 divine martial guards caught up, not giving the 2 of them any chance. Sandalwood clutched his chest, coughing out blood. However, he was not willing to give up, bringing the young Martial Marquis on his back and fleeing. This was the first time they met, and it could not even be considered an official meeting. However, as martial marquises of Great Xia, no reason was important. The glory of a martial marquis was above everything. Great Xia's West Shadow Marquis was destined to live in the shadows. For the future of Great Xia, this was the first time he appeared under the sun, but it would also be the last time. His broken heart continued to spurt out blood. Sandalwood looked at the first rays of dawn rising from the east, and his eyes were unprecedentedly bright. "Senior." Ning Chen's consciousness temporarily recovered, and he looked at the figure in front of him. Sandalwood's right hand formed a sword finger, activating his vast essence and injecting the last of his precious wealth into Ning Chen's forehead. He then pushed with his palm, sending Ning Chen thousands of feet away. "Live on." His last order was so calm, and he did not say anything more. This was the first and last time the 2 martial marquises of Great Xia faced each other. From today onwards, they hoped that they would never meet again. After sending Ning Chen away, Sandalwood turned around. Looking at Zhong Qianqiu and the others who had caught up, he blocked with his sword. Chapter 274. The sounds of the great battle were coming to an end. The broken Bai Ling was stabbed into the ground, accompanying its master as he walked through the last part of his life. In the distance, the glow of phoenix blood was incomparably brilliant. Ning Chen's body was surrounded by a red light that soared into the sky. Under the first light of dawn, it was like a second sun had risen, illuminating the world. Seeing the shocking phenomenon in the east, Zhong Qianqiu, Residual Wind, and the others felt uneasy. Everywhere in the world was shocked once again when they saw this bloody pillar of light. Phoenix cries shook the heavens and the earth. Everyone saw the bloody light in the sky. It was so dazzling that it was as if the entire sky was dyed in blood. It was extremely beautiful. His phoenix bloodline had awakened, and his physical body had entered the Xiantian realm again. In an instant, he broke through layers of shackles and drew the power of the world into his body. After 2 years, his cultivation and realm had finally become one again. Ning Chen, who had recovered, did not hesitate to temporarily suppress his terrifying injuries. His killing intent surged into the sky. On the top of the spiritual platform, the strange rock appeared again and soared into the sky. In front of the Eternal Night cult, Tan Zhu, who had fallen to the ground, saw the beautiful colors in the distant sky. A hint of relief flashed through his gradually dimming eyes. It was worth it. Senior. A blood-red figure flashed past and caught the fallen Wu Ho with a pained expression. Tan Zhu gently opened his mouth and said a few words. They were very soft and could not be heard clearly. Only the last sentence could be vaguely heard as it floated in the wind. From now, from now on, the Great Xia is in your hands." His last wish was still the Great Xia behind him. The Great Xia Marshal Marquis would not rest until he died. "Senior, Junior will take you home." Ning Chen's heart ached like a knife. He gently closed Marquis Xieying's eyes, then tore off his bloody clothes and tied him to his back. Last night, Senior had taken him out of the encirclement. Today, he was taking Senior home. Zhong Qianxiu felt the dangerous aura coming from the former. His expression turned serious. 4 purple talismans appeared in his hand and he summoned his technique spirit. The evil gods descended. Swords, halberds, axes, and battle-axes shook the heavens. It was one of Zhong Qianxiu's strongest techniques. Every evil god had strength that surpassed the third tribulation of the Xiantian realm. They were abnormally powerful. Ning Chen looked at the 4 green-faced evil gods in front of him. His blood-red robe fluttered in the wind. He waved his hand and forced the knowing destiny sword out of his body. Suddenly, a tragic scene of blood gushing into the sky. The power of the thunder, ice, and wind sources surged and swept across the land. Knowing destiny held in his hand. The blood patterns on the cyan sword shone brightly. After a breath, the bloody clothes disappeared and the sword pierced through the clouds. The 2 evil gods, Fu and Yu, were the first to bear the brunt of the attack. They were shattered by the terrifying sword light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The knowing destiny sword spun and waved. With a bang, the evil god retreated and opened up a path. Ning Chen's silhouette vanished once more as he reappeared in front of Zhong Qianxiu. With a tearing sound, Zhong Qianxiu's clothes tore apart. A gash appeared on his purple robe, and a trace of blood dripped down, dyeing his clothes red. Zhong Qianxiu's face darkened as he gathered his yuan energy with a flip of his palm. Thunderous roars filled the air, turning the world into a sea of lightning. The 2 evil gods were in the sea of lightning. Their halberds and swords slashed down once more. At the same time, Remnant Wind and the remaining 3 divine martial guards charged up and blocked the path ahead. Ning Chen's expression was ice cold. With a wave of his hand, the knowing destiny sword spun into the air. The lightning source spread out and absorbed the power of the lightning. In the next moment, knowing destiny sword descended from the sky, and a majestic aura spread out. The 3 divine martial guards could not handle the power, and their bodies exploded. Their blood and bones scattered and returned to the heavens and earth. Remnant Wind could not block this terrifying aura. The ancient sword in his hand broke, and his body flew out. Blood fell like rain. Just a moment ago, he was still being chased by them, but now, he had undergone such a huge change. His situation was completely different, and it was shocking. Ning Chen, who had regained his consciousness, was no longer someone who could be trampled on. The absolute gap in strength made Residual Wind see clearly that the evenly matched sword fight last night was just an illusion that Ning Chen thought was infallible. Remnant Wind, back down. Zhong Qianxiu ordered solemnly. His divine martial guards were pretty much all dead, and he could not sacrifice them for nothing. Yes. Remnant Wind took 2 steps back and dragged his heavily injured body out of the battlefield. Although he was unwilling, he could only listen to the order. He was clear that the following battle was not something he could touch. Develop Yin and Yang, form the 4 divisions, absolute martial arts, create the will of a god. Zhong Qianxiu formed a seal and used the endless power of faith in the god sect. Lightning appeared in the 9 heavens, and mountains and rivers collapsed. Amidst the terrifying phenomenon, an illusionary body slowly formed and shook the universe. The moment the god that gathered faith appeared, 10 miles of land flew up, unable to handle such extreme power. It was like the end of the world. Scroll of the earth. Ning Chen took half a step forward, and a dark yellow light rose around his body. The strongest person in the world used the extreme heaven book once more. The yellow light spread out, and the land that rose up into the sky was once again affected by the power. It crumbled and fell back down, returning to its original state. Black mist floated up and down, and the face of the god could not be seen. Gray feathers filled the sky, and the terrifying aura seemed like the world could not tolerate it. Space twisted, and circles of ripples spread out in all directions. Facing the incomparably strong illusionary body, Ning Chen's sword followed. His sword intent gathered, and he arrived in an instant. His sword broke through the void and clashed head-on with the god body. The heaven-opening sword clashed with the deity's body, causing a loud explosion. Raging winds engulfed everything. Ning Chen and Zhong Qianxiu both took a few steps back at the same time. The god body was injured by the sword intent, and it flickered continuously. At the same time, behind the second shrine, the power of faith flew out from the abyss of darkness and entered the god body, stabilizing it. Ning Chen's eyes squinted. He stepped back, and his body disappeared under the sun. Hall Master. Remnant Wind walked up and said anxiously. There's no need to chase. Zhong Qianxiu wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, waved his hand to send back the power of faith, and said, it's hard to keep this person alive for the time being. It's useless to chase after him. Remnant Wind clenched his fists, and his eyes were full of unwillingness. Let's go back to the shrine. Zhong Qianxiu turned around, and his figure flashed toward the shrine. Remnant Wind looked at the disappearing figure in the east, suppressed the anger in his heart, and turned to follow. Inside the shrine, blood flowed, and broken bodies were everywhere. Countless guards and generals died in this battle. It was the first time in 1,000 years that they had suffered such a disaster. Since the beginning of the war, there was no justice. All that was left was cruelty and blood. No matter how beautiful the rhetoric was, it was just a lie to deceive oneself and others. The winner was king, and the loser was in the wrong. The history books had always been written by the victors. Every stroke had some truth to it. However, what did the people do? What did the mountains and rivers do? In the western border of the Great Xia, in front of the camp of the Black Water Army, a bloody light appeared. The knowing destiny sword trembled and penetrated into the body, and then disappeared in the blood. Ning Chen coughed out a mouthful of blood. His breathing was chaotic, and the injuries in his body were about to erupt again. Marquis Victorious Return heard the commotion and immediately walked out. Seeing the bloody figure in front of him, his expression changed, and he stepped forward to support him. Knowing destiny Marquis. Marquis Victorious Return turned his palm and condensed his yuan, and injected it into the former's body to help stabilize his injuries. Suddenly, Marquis Victorious Return's body froze. Seeing the figure on Ning Chen's back, his heart trembled, and he said in disbelief. Chedo. The most familiar face was now forever separated by heaven. Marquis Victorious Return's heart was in so much pain that he could no longer cry out. Farewell, Marquis Wu. Not far away, after hearing this name, the Blackwater Army soldiers were startled at first, but then they silently knelt down and respectfully sent him off. After slightly suppressing his injuries, Ning Chen quickly explained the situation of his investigation in the Eternal Night Shrine. At the last moment, he tiredly said, this junior will first send Senior Chedo back to the Imperial City. As for the matter of Martial Monarch, it should be resolved as soon as possible before the 3 disasters expert of the Eternal Night Shrine comes out of seclusion. Also, the person sent by the 4 extremes, Marquis Victorious Return listened to the information exchanged with life and blood, and carefully memorized it in his heart. Ning Chen left without even having the time to heal his injuries. One crisis after another made him unable to split himself, and he didn't dare to stop for even a moment. 15 kilometers west of the Imperial City, in front of a lonely grave, Ning Chen appeared with Marquis Chedo. No one knew whose grave this was. Every year during the Qingming festival, only Marquis Chedo would come alone to deliver a stalk of sandalwood. The flower would bloom for a day, but in the end, it would silently wither in front of the empty grave. Ning Chen buried Marquis Cheto with the person in the lonely grave. From then on, they would meet again, and they would no longer be lonely on the road to the Yellow Springs. Marquis Cheto, who had lived like a shadow for his entire life, finally chose to peacefully return to the Grand Xia without any light. His soul returned to his homeland, and he had no regrets in this life. Ning Chen knelt down and silently kowtowed 4 times. The figure covered in blood had a young face and a proud character. The emperor had never been willing to bend his knees, and had only knelt to 2 people in his life. The first was his eldest grandson, and the second was Prince Yen. Today, in front of Cheto's grave, he respectfully knelt down. The life-saving grace was like a new life, but it could never be repaid. Cheto's last words echoed in his ears, and from now on, they were deeply engraved in his heart. The cold north wind blew by, and the dried sandalwood in front of the grave swayed. The blood-red figure disappeared. Ning Chen had just entered the manor when he saw Ning Shi and Ruo Shi, who had been anxiously waiting for him for several days. Before he could speak, he heard a bolt from the blue. "Brother, something happened. King Haowu was seriously injured and is now in critical condition. He can't hold on any longer." Ah! The sudden bad news affected the injuries that had been suppressed for a long time. Ning Chen staggered, spat out a mouthful of blood, and fell straight to the ground. "Brother! Marquis!" Ning Shi and Lu Ruoshi's expressions changed greatly. They stepped forward to support the former's body, their faces full of fear. "Take me to King Haowu." Before he could finish his words, the broken body that had held on for a day and night finally couldn't hold on any longer and fainted. The calls in his ears could no longer be heard. His body was covered in blood, new red, old red, and now mixed together. No one could tell them apart. King Haowu's manor, the candlelight flickered. A wind blew from somewhere, and the candlelight flickered violently. The light changed several times, as if it would go out at any time. On the bed, the vitality that was gradually dissipating was irreversible. No matter how Luo Fei concentrated her qi, it was no longer effective. Chapter 275. King and Ho were in danger, and Xia Kingdom had fallen. The news could no longer be hidden. After Zhang Sun heard it, his body shook violently, and he almost fainted. In Haowu Mansion, Xia Mingri, Grand Advisor, Duke Jingwu. Many figures were guarding the room. Everyone's expression was unusually heavy, and the atmosphere was so oppressive that it was hard to breathe. Ning Shi followed Ning Chen's instructions before he fainted and brought him here. However, the latter had not woken up since he fainted. The injury from the palm strike that he had suppressed completely broke out. An unprecedented powerhouse had almost destroyed a person's soul with one strike. Previously, he had relied on his restored cultivation to suppress it. Unexpectedly, the sudden bad news made him anxious, and his injury worsened. Luofei, Qing Ning, and Grand Advisor took turns to inject vital energy into the two, trying to protect their last breath. On the side, Zhang Sun looked at the two. His heart ached as if it was being cut by 1,000 knives. He could not accept this fact. Mother, Xia Xinyu supported the former. Tears flashed in her beautiful eyes. She did not know what to say. Time passed little by little. The night was coming to an end. Xia Mingri and the others had left. The war was getting more and more urgent. There was no time to waste. When the emperor left, his face was gloomy. The people behind him were silent. They did not dare to say a word for fear of angering the emperor. In the room, vital energy fluctuations were surging. Qin Ning and the others had tried their best. However, the two were too injured to be of any use. If only he was still awake, Qin Ning's heart ached. In the past, no matter what happened, as long as he was there would be a way. Now, he was in trouble, but she could do nothing. Outside the room, the bell rang. The ghost girl appeared. She pushed the door open and entered. Seeing the figure on the bed covered in blood, her delicate hands turned pale. Once again, he put himself between life and death. Was Xia Kingdom really so important to him? Or did the people of the world have anything to do with him? She did not care about the life and death of the people of the world, but he could not die. The ghost girl stepped forward and waved her hand to urge the ghost source, sending the drop of phoenix blood he gave her back into his body. Vigorous ghost chi filled the room. In the past, in front of the heavenly mandate palace, Zhang Sun, Qing Ning, and the others had all seen the ghost lady, so they did not stop her, hoping that a miracle would happen. When the phoenix blood entered his body, after a brief moment of ripples, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. It didn't have the effect that he had imagined. It was as if his own blood was returning to his body, and the effect it had was becoming weaker and weaker. Imperial brother. On the other side, the life force in Xia Zi's body started to dissipate faster and faster. Xia Xinyu turned her head away in pain as tears streamed down her face. At this moment, Zhang Sun finally couldn't hold on any longer. His vision turned black, and he fell down. Imperial Mother. Nyang Nyang. Xia Xinyu and Qing Ning were shocked. They hurriedly went forward to catch him and carefully helped him sit down on a chair. After a night of worry and anxiety, Zhang Sun was already mentally and physically exhausted. She closed her eyes weakly, and 2 lines of tears quietly slid down her face. Outside the Haowu mansion, a figure in blue brocade appeared. A cold smile appeared on his excessively handsome face. A moment later, he turned into a stream of light and headed for the western border. No one would have guessed that Xian Ji, who had been missing for a long time, was in the imperial city of the great Xia dynasty. He had been patiently waiting for the right time to appear. Today, the time was ripe. It was also the time for the 4 extremes and the divine land to join forces. In front of the Eternal Night sect, Xian Ji walked over. The moment he stepped into the formation, in the second divine palace, Zhong Qianxiu sensed something. He flashed and came to the front of the formation. The 4 extremes Holy Land and the Eternal Night sect. The first meeting between the 2 top military counselors of ancient inheritances had created the most intense sparks. Develop yin and yang, turn into the 4 divisions. No sun in 8 directions, raging sea and thunder. Without saying a word, Zhong Qianxiu waved his hand and performed a special technique. Wind and clouds rose in the sky and turned into a sea of thunder. Heaven and earth, heaven and earth, heaven and earth, limitless seal space. Xian Ji performed a spell. He flipped his hand and held up the sky. Suddenly, an illusory and invisible cloud spread out, blocking the descending thunder. The surging thunder kept colliding with the cloud, and the dazzling light kept flashing. Below, the 2 looked at each other. They had the same cold eyes and the same heartless face. Lord, is this how the Eternal Night sect welcomes guests? Xian Ji asked. Who are you? Asked Zhong Qianxiu coldly. For Extreme's Holy Land, Xian Ji, said Xian Ji calmly. Zhong Qianxiu narrowed his eyes. It was them. They had finally come. Lord, having guests stand outside doesn't conform to the hospitality of the divine land, does it? Xian Ji's lips curled into an emotionless smile. Heh, it's Qianxiu who has been negligent. Honored guests naturally have to be courteous. Zhong Qianxiu smiled and turned to the side. The 2 of them walked toward the second divine palace, each with their own thoughts. That heartless smile on their faces made people feel even colder. The grand second divine palace was surrounded by many other palaces. Not long after, the 2 of them walked in and the doors closed. Honored guests, please have a seat, said Zhong Qianxiu courteously. I wouldn't dare. How could I overstep the Lord's authority? Xian Ji shook his head. Zhong Qianxiu smiled indifferently and waved his hand. A table and chair flew over and landed between the two of them. Please. Many thanks. The two of them sat down across from each other. Zhong Qianxiu poured 2 cups of tea and pushed one of them in front of him. Brother Xianji, you didn't go directly to the martial lord. Instead, you came here. It seems you're very clear about the divine land situation. Xianji picked up the cup and took a sip. Does the Lord know where the Grand Xia's Jiming Marquis has gone in the past 2 years? The 4 extreme realms, said Zhong Qianxiu. Xianji nodded. Since the Lord has already guessed, you should know why I didn't go directly to the martial lord. It seems Brother Xianji is very wary of that person, said Zhong Qianxiu. I wouldn't say I'm wary, but it's never wrong to be careful, said Xianji calmly. Perhaps Brother Xianji will be able to relax soon. That person is no longer a threat. Whether or not he can survive is still a 50-50 thing, said Zhong Qianxiu. I hope so. Xianji nodded, then put down the teacup in his hand and said softly, Palace Master, can we talk about business now? Zhong Qianxiu smiled. Haven't we been talking about proper business all this time? The Grand Xia has flourished for thousands of years, and its foundation is extraordinary. In the eyes of the Grand Xia, the Eternal Night Church is undoubtedly a thorn in its side. I think the Hall Master knows better than I do that there is no way to end this war peacefully. The Church needs a strong and friendly ally to face this situation together, Xianji said clearly. Qianxiu's thinking is a bit different from Brother Xianji's. From the current situation, the Grand Xia's decline is obvious. Now that the Grand Xia has lost 2 key figures, King Haowu and the Jiming Marquis, the decline will only accelerate. It's only a matter of time before the Church regains control of the divine land, said Zhong Qianxiu unhurriedly. Lord, do you think the Grand Xia will be defeated so easily? A centipede dies but never falls down. Lord, you must not forget that the majority of the divine land's karmic luck is still in the hands of the Grand Xia. The Grand Xia's flourishing for 1,000 years wasn't just a fluke. Xianji no longer beat around the bush. My Lord has promised that once the passage between the 2 realms is opened, the Holy Lands will immediately send troops to help the Church conquer the Grand Xia. In the future, the 4 extremities sacred lands and the divine land will be jointly controlled by the Eternal Night Church and the 4 extremities sacred lands. Lord's sincerity has moved me. However, opening the passage between realms requires an enormous amount of energy. Lord Wu is the strongest expert of my church. Once his cultivation base is damaged, it will give the Grand Xia an opportunity to take advantage of. Zhong Qianxiu sighed. At the same time, in the imperial city of the Grand Xia, King Haowu's manor. Seeing that Ning Chen's injuries were irreversible, Ghost Woman released the ghost origin in her body. Using her blood as a guide, she took Rakshasa's life. Boundless vitality poured into Ning Chen's body from Ghost Woman's body. Her strange spiritual energy surpassed the world's understanding. However, as her spiritual energy left her body, Ghost Woman's body became illusory, as if she would disappear at any moment. At this moment, Ning Chen's finger moved slightly. Ghost Woman saw this and used her ghost origin to heal him. He slowly opened his eyes. They were dim, but it shocked everyone in the room. They were both sad and happy. Ning Chen came back to his senses and directly severed the connection between them. Without wasting any time, he turned to Xia Zi and said hoarsely, "Help me over. You can't even protect yourself. Do you want to die?" Raged Ghost Woman. "Hurry. If you're any slower, it'll be too late," said Ning Chen. "No." Ghost Woman didn't care about anyone else's life and death. Ning Chen struggled to get up. However, with his heavily injured body, he didn't have any strength left. He directly fell off the bed. "You!" Ghost Woman was so angry that she couldn't say anything. She quickly went to support him. She was both anxious and angry. Why couldn't he listen to her just this once? Hurry! Seeing Xia Zi's aura grow weaker and weaker, Ning Chen became angry and powerlessly shouted. Ghost Woman couldn't change his mind. She could only help him up and let him lean against Xia Zi's bed. What are you doing? Asked Qing Ning uneasily. Zhang Sun didn't know what was going on, but he could hear the uneasiness in Qing Ning's voice. He immediately stood up to stop her. Don't worry. I have phoenix blood protecting me. I won't die that easily. With a weak voice, Ning Chen forcefully condensed his true essence and pointed it at Xia Zi's heart. Immediately, strands of blood flew out from his fingertip and rapidly filled Xia Zi's body. Xia Zi's blood was so weak that it was almost undetectable. Although he didn't know why, his blood contained the power of phoenix blood, so it was the best way to save someone. Blood-changing technique couldn't be used casually. He didn't dare to let anyone else try it, so he was the only one who could do it. Gradually, Xia Zi's scattered vitality began to recover. With the return of his blood and phoenix blood, his injuries were healed. Half of his body was slowly pulled out of the gates of hell. Good friend, I've done my best. The rest is up to you. A quarter of an hour later, Ning Chen powerlessly dropped his arms. His eyes were filled with exhaustion as he fainted once more. Ghost Woman silently supported the unconscious figure and placed him back on the bed. She unconsciously staggered, but did her best to stabilize herself. Chapter 276. Legend had it that there was a Rakshasa woman in hell. She was heartless, but also loyal. When she met someone she loved, she would give her heart to him. There were always discrepancies in legends. No one could live after giving up their heart. However, it was true that the Rakshasa woman's life was bound to him. Ning Chen sensed that the ghost woman's life force was transferred to him, so he severed the life, but he didn't expect that it would harm the ghost woman. Zhang Sun walked forward to support the former and said softly, I'm sorry. This is what I owe him. The ghost woman said weakly. Zhang Sun sighed and didn't say anything else. She could decide anything about Ning Chen, except for matters of the heart. Or rather, she hoped that he could find someone he truly loved. People were selfish, and she was no exception. She could see the ghost woman's heart clearly, but she could only pretend that she didn't know. When Qing Ning saw their injuries, she walked to Xia Xinyu's side and asked, Princess, please come out with me for a moment. Xia Xinyu glanced at her brother who was still unconscious on the bed and silently followed Qing Ning out. Outside the room, Qing Ning looked at the girl in front of her and asked seriously, Princess, what's wrong with your body? Xia Xinyu was silent for a moment, then begged softly, please keep it a secret, Sister Qing Ning. She knew that this matter couldn't be hidden from Qing Ning, who was a Xiantian expert. Every time she went to the palace to pay her respects, it was her brother who used his righteous qi to cover up the 7 extinction phenomena for her. Now that her brother was unconscious and his true qi had dissipated, this matter couldn't be hidden anymore. Qing Ning frowned and said, I can help you hide it for now, but the Empress will find out sooner or later. We can't hide it forever. You'd better be prepared. Xia Xinyu nodded and sighed, I'll hide it for as long as I can. Who's that strange girl in the room? Qing Ning suddenly asked. Sister Luofei. I'm not sure, but she saved my brother. Xia Xinyu replied. Hearing the answer, a strange light flashed in Qing Ning's eyes. In the Eternal Night Cult and the Second Temple, the negotiations about opening the passage between the two realms were still ongoing. Both sides had their own positions, and neither wanted to let the other side gain an advantage. Under their fake smiles, they tried their best to test each other's bottom line. The war between the Eternal Night Cult and the Great Xia was getting crueler by the day, and both sides were suffering more and more losses. Xian Ji knew very well that the Eternal Night Cult urgently needed a powerful external aid, and the existence of the four extremities could provide this power. Zhong Qianxiu was also not an easy person. He didn't talk about the situation of the divine sect and only talked about the difficulty of opening the passage between the two realms. Now that he had the martial lord, an indispensable trump card to open the passage between the two realms, he naturally had to fight for the benefits of the divine sect to the greatest extent. As for the four poles and Everknight's promise to control the two realms together, that was just nonsense and meaningless. What the Eternal Night cult needed was time. Before the Lord of the Abyss of Darkness came out of seclusion, they must ensure that the flames of war didn't spread to the divine sect. The negotiations were fruitless for a long time. Xian Ji knew that if he didn't show some sincerity, the person in front of him wouldn't relent. So he waved his hand and took out 3 drops of phoenix blood, and gave it to Zhong Qianxiu, saying, "Hall Master, the Realm Lord has already considered all your worries. These 3 drops of phoenix blood will help the martial lord recover as soon as possible after opening the passage between the two realms." Zhong Qianxiu didn't rush to take the phoenix blood, but poured himself another cup of tea and said lightly, "The fact that the Ascension Valley has phoenix blood is no longer a secret. Isn't the Realm Lord a little stingy?" Xian Ji didn't get angry, and patiently explained, "Hall Master, you may not know, but the phoenix that was trapped in the longevity pond in my realm has been released by Marquis Jiming. Now there are only 3 drops of phoenix blood left, and the phoenix is different from other divine beasts. It can control the world's extreme speed. Once it escapes, it will be difficult to trap it again. That's too unfortunate." Zhong Qianxiu sighed and stood up. "Brother Xian Ji, it's already late. Why don't you rest for the night? We can talk tomorrow." Xian Ji frowned. This Eternal Night strategist really wasn't easy to deal with. His appetite was even bigger than he had imagined. "Then I'll have to trouble you to make the arrangements." Xian Ji stood up. Zhong Qianxiu clapped his hands, and a beautiful woman walked out. She bowed and respectfully said, "Hall Master." "Bring the honored guest to rest," said Zhong Qianxiu. "Yes." The woman walked over to Xian Ji and bowed. "Please. Thank you for your trouble." Xian Ji followed the woman out of the hall. In the side hall, after the woman had made the necessary arrangements, she left. Xian Ji stood in the room, his eyes flashing. Confidence and appetite always went hand in hand. This strategist of the Eternal Night sect didn't seem very sincere about the negotiations. He was either bluffing or pretending, or he was truly confident that the Eternal Night sect had a better chance of winning this war. Thinking of this, Xian Ji formed a seal with his hands. Light gathered around him, and an illusory figure appeared in the air. "Realm Master." Xian Ji bowed respectfully. "Xian Ji, how did it go?" asked the Realm Master of the Four Extremes. "Reporting to Realm Master, the candidate has been chosen, but..." Xian Ji gave a simple explanation of what had happened in the Divine Prefecture and the results of today's negotiations. After hearing the report, the Realm Master of the Four Extremes said, "Give him the Fortune Jade. Don't delay any longer. Open the passage between the two realms as soon as possible." "But..." Xian Ji was startled. "There's no need to say more. If the jade is lost, we can always snatch it back. The bigger picture is more important." With that, the figure in the air slowly faded away. Xian Ji silently bowed, then got up and walked to the window. Looking at the rising moon, his tightly furrowed brows didn't loosen. In the Haowu Manor, Ning Chen had already woken up. After being severely injured, he was weak and needed to recuperate. Ning Shi took him back to the manor so that it would be easier to take care of him. Although Xia Zi's pulse was much better, he was still unconscious. No one knew when he would wake up. Zhang Sun and Qing Ning couldn't stay outside forever, so they returned to the Weiyang Palace. Before leaving, Zhang Sun bowed to Luofei solemnly to thank her for saving his son. Luofei moved away and didn't accept the bow. She smiled and said, I don't dare to accept your bow. Saving him was just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. Qi Ning glanced at Luofei but didn't say anything. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't suspicious of the sudden appearance of a Khanate expert. However, she wasn't good at this kind of thing. If she had the chance, she would ask for Ning Chen's opinion. In the Jiming manner, Ning Chen sat in a wheelchair and looked at Meng Xuanji sleeping on the bed. He frowned slightly. He had obtained the cultivation method to repair her Dantian Qi Si, but with his current body, he couldn't heal her. Ning Shi, Ning Chen said softly. Brother, Ning Shi stepped forward and said. Go to the Heavenly Sky Academy and ask the dean to come over. Tell him that the manor needs his help, Ning Chen instructed. Okay, Ning Shi nodded and quickly walked out. Ruoshi, Ning Chen called again. Marquis, Lu Ruoshi stepped forward and said softly. Push me out of the manor. As for where to go, it's up to you, Ning Chen said. Lu Ruoshi's eyes flashed with worry and said, Marquis, your body needs to rest. You can't go out yet. Just do as I say. Let's go, Ning Chen didn't explain further. Lu Ruoshi had no choice but to push the wheelchair out of the manor. Winter in the Grand Xia hadn't completely passed. The cold north wind blew from time to time, causing pedestrians to shiver. Lu Ruoshi pushed Ning Chen along the street, covering his fur coat from time to time to block the cold wind. The weather was very cold, and Ning Chen's body was still very weak. He coughed a few times from time to time, and the exhaustion in his eyes grew stronger. However, he had to come out. Zi was injured and unconscious, and the imperial city's combat power had greatly decreased. He came out to tell the Eternal Night sect that he was still alive. Marquis. When the pedestrians saw the figure in the wheelchair, they respectfully saluted. Ning Chen nodded in response. His expression was calm, and there was no change from 3 years ago. After seeing the kindness, ruthlessness, and changeability of the common people, it was difficult for him to have any different emotions. It didn't matter if they cursed or respected him. Originally, his original intention wasn't to protect them. As for the change later, it was only because there were too many people who cared about him. People were not plants. If they cared, he could only care. For 1,000 years, generations of marquises had sacrificed their lives to protect this beautiful land. In comparison, his sacrifice was not worth mentioning. Ruoshi, go to the Marquis shrine, Ning Chen said softly. Okay. Lu Ruoshi nodded and immediately turned around, pushing the wheelchair towards the Marquis shrine. In front of the Marquis shrine, the guards immediately knelt down to welcome the person in the wheelchair. When the two walked into the shrine, they were greeted by rows of memorial tablets of the previous marquises of the Grand Xia. The various names represented the marquises of the Grand Xia who had fought for their entire lives and died without any regrets. The glory of the Grand Xia could never be blasphemed. This was the first time Lu Ruoshi had come to the Marquis shrine. When she saw the rows of familiar and unfamiliar names, she was shocked. In the past, she had only heard the names of the marquises who had sacrificed their lives for the Grand Xia. She had never thought that there would be so many of them after 1,000 years. Ruoshi, kneel down, Ning Chen said. Lu Ruoshi obediently knelt down. Look carefully at the names on the tablets. The Grand Xia today was fought for by these marquises and countless soldiers who sacrificed their lives. I don't care what others say. However, you are someone from the Marquis mansion. Whether you stay in the Marquis mansion in the future or marry into another family, you must not forget your roots. Also, don't forget to tell your children that their peace is not something given to them by the heavens. Please cherish it, Ning Chen said sternly. Lu Ruoshi silently agreed and respectfully kowtowed 4 times in front of each Marquis tablet. Seeing Ruoshi kowtowing in front of the shrine, Ning Chen's tired eyes flashed with a trace of emotion. If the people could trust each other more, the war between the Grand Xia and the Eternal Night sect wouldn't be so difficult. He already knew about the matter in Great Wisdom City. It was impossible not to know. According to the news from his spies, the people there were actually signs of a riot after being bewitched. Chapter 277. Eternal Night Cult. Xian Ji took out the fortune jade of heaven and earth, and Zhong Qianxiu's attitude changed a lot. It didn't take long for him to agree to the alliance. The divine sect obtained the heaven and earth fortune jade and the 3 drops of phoenix blood. The 4 extreme holy lands obtained Zhong Qianxiu's oath. The opening of the passage between the 2 realms was almost a foregone conclusion. The only problem was that the movements of the martial monarchs were something that Great Xia was paying close attention to. With Marquis Kaixuan nearby and Dean Tianzong far away, it would not be easy to escape. Moreover, when opening the passage between the 2 realms, one needed to be fully focused and could not be disturbed. Otherwise, all 3 parties would suffer a backlash from the boundary force. How to deal with these worries was the most important thing for the 2 of them to consider now. Inside the Void God Temple, Zhong Qianxiu opened the Eternal Night Scripture. After examining it for a long time, his eyes flashed. Dao body, he. The existence of the Chaos Scroll interfered with the power of the Light Scroll. But now, there was finally some progress. Zhong Qianxiu closed the Eternal Night Scripture and set up another restriction before leaving. Hall Master, a warrior in green appeared in front of the second divine hall and knelt down. He said respectfully, "There's news from the Xia dynasty's imperial city. The Jiming Marquis is still alive." Zhong Qianxiu frowned. This wasn't good news. What about Xia Zi? Is she dead or alive? Zhong Qianxiu asked slowly. Currently, the Haowu mansion is heavily guarded. We haven't found anything yet, replied the general in Cyan. Search again, Zhong Qianxiu said coldly. Yes, sir, the general in green ordered, then got up and left. The palace master seems to have encountered some trouble. I wonder if I can help, said Xian Ji with a smile. The Jiming Marquis is still alive. I don't think that's good news for Brother Xuanji, said Zhong Qianxiu. Palace master, you're right. Xian Ji smiled coldly and continued, this person is a huge threat. It's best to get rid of him as soon as possible. Brother Xuanji, do you have any plans? Zhong Qianxiu asked. It's very simple. As long as I take the initiative to show myself, he'll naturally take the bait. When the time comes, it'll depend on the Hall Master's plan, Xian Ji replied. Zhong Qianxiu thought for a moment, and said, since that's the case, then let's go to Moonfall City. Letting him die in the same place as Fan Lingyue doesn't seem like a bad choice. In the backyard of the Jiming Marquis mansion, a huge spiritual energy whirlpool was violently revolving. Within the whirlpool, a girl that was sealed in ice floated up and down. In front of her, Dean Tianzong flipped his palm and condensed his yuan. A vast amount of spiritual energy was injected into the girl's body, repairing the latter's damaged qi bit by bit. Not far away, Ning Chen sat in his wheelchair and watched this scene quietly. He was constantly considering what to do next. Minister. Outside the backyard, Kong Yu knelt down and respectfully greeted. Get up, Ning Chen said calmly. You are now the head of the Tyli department. A man has gold under his knees. Don't kneel to others so easily. Yes, Kong Yu replied. Is there any news? Ning Chen asked. Reporting to the Marquis, there is nothing out of the ordinary in Ascension Valley. However, a spy reported that he had seen a person who looked extremely similar to the portrait drawn by the Marquis in Fallen Moon City. Because he was worried that this person would be suspicious, he did not dare to get too close. He sent someone to deliver the news and asked the Marquis to make a decision, Kong Yu respectfully reported. Understood. Continue to have people keep an eye on him. Ning Chen nodded. Yes. Kong Yu was just about to kneel when he remembered the Marquis' teachings. He cupped his fists and quickly left. After Kong Yu left, Ning Chen narrowed his eyes. This person had finally shown himself. Can you accompany me to Fallen Moon City? Ning Chen looked at the room on the right and asked. Yes. Ghost Woman's voice came from the room. In the courtyard, as time passed, the spiritual energy vortex gradually converged and finally disappeared. Meng Xuanji's body slowly descended from the sky. Her injured Qi had mostly recovered and her aura had gradually stabilized. She had escaped the danger of death. Thank you for your help, Principal. Ning Chen arranged for Ning Shi to bring Meng Xuanji back to her room to recuperate. It was nothing, the principal said with a trace of exhaustion between his brows. Ruoshi, serve the tea, Ning Chen ordered. Lu Ruoshi softly complied. Not long after, she brought the tea over and placed it on the stone table in the courtyard. Principal, please. Ning Chen moved his wheelchair to the stone table. Principal Tian Song knew the young man had something to say, so he walked over and sat down, waiting for him to speak. Junior has a matter I wish to ask you. I hope you can resolve it, Ning Chen said. Please speak. Principal Tian Song took a sip of tea. With your cultivation, can you stop the martial lord? Ning Chen seriously asked. Principal Tian Song shook his head. No. What if Senior Marquis Victorious return was added? Ning Chen continued to ask. There's a 40% chance, Principal Tian Song replied. Ning Chen frowned. It wasn't even half. It seemed the martial lord's current strength was even greater than he had expected. Principal Tian Song put down the tea in his hand and calmly said, let me give you a word of advice. The martial lord is known as the #1 expert of the divine prefecture not only because of his dual Qi. Even in terms of absolute strength, he is still the #1 expert under the heavens. Do not rashly take risks. Ning Chen nodded. Thank you for your reminder. Junior will keep it in mind. Not long after, the principal stood up and left, returning to the academy. In front of the stone table, only Ning Chen remained, silently sitting and pondering. The appearance of the people sent by the sacred grounds meant the 4 extreme calamities had reached their most crucial moment. Being able to eliminate the martial lord was naturally the best choice, but it was also the most difficult method. The other choice was to eliminate the people from the 4 extreme sacred grounds, and at the same time find a way to seal the weak point of the boundary between the 2 realms in Ascension Valley. From the performance of the Disaster King and the 4 extreme realms master that day, opening the boundary between the 2 realms was not an easy matter. At that time, he could clearly feel that the consumption of their cultivation was extremely intense. Other than that, there should be some other huge price he didn't know of. However, since the 4 extreme sacred grounds could send 1 person, they could send a second, and a third. The reason why there were no other movements was probably because they were waiting for news of that person. As for how to seal Ascension Valley, he still didn't have the slightest clue. He knew almost nothing about the power of space, let alone sealing the weak point of the boundary between the 2 realms. Time passed day by day. Information about Xianji from Luoyue City was continuously sent to the Marquis residence. After that person appeared, Ning Chen didn't seem to be in a hurry, and patiently dealt with other matters. The signs of chaos in Hanya City became more and more obvious. Large amounts of survivors who lost their loved ones in the Sea of Fire were bewitched by people with ulterior motives. They continuously gathered, and it looked like a huge riot was about to happen. The Great Xia had always been divided into civil and military officials. The civil officials were responsible for governing the country, the military generals were responsible for marching troops and fighting wars. One of the reasons for the riot in Hanya City was because they were bewitched by people, and the other reason was because of the corruption and incompetence of the officials who were normally full of righteousness, morality, and the principles of governing the country. This caused the tens of thousands of victims to have no place to stay. They were forced to wander outside, and under the pressure of hunger and cold, they became even more resentful. To a large extent, the civil officials of the Great Xia were related to the Confucian sect. Ever since the war started, the power of the civil officials had been greatly weakened, and this already made many people secretly unhappy. Ning Chen originally did not want to participate in this matter, but seeing the martial Marquis and soldiers fighting outside with no regard for their own lives, and these officials were still sowing discord and shirking responsibility, he finally could not bear it any longer and attended the morning court for the first time. When the many marquises and officials entered the hall and saw the person in the wheelchair, they were all stunned. As they say, a person's name was like the shadow of a tree. The name Jiming Marquis was already the most legendary presence in Great Xia. No one expected that this person who could not be seen normally would actually appear here. When Xia Mingri heard the eunuch report that the Jiming Marquis had come to the court, he was stunned. Only when he saw the person did he truly believe it. The contents of the morning court were mostly about the western battlefield. Ning Chen listened quietly and did not interrupt. Xia Mingri had many questions in his heart, but it was not convenient for him to ask in front of all the officials. As such, he dealt with the matters in the morning court and wanted to wait until after the morning court to ask the person in front of him if there was anything wrong. Looking at the young man in the wheelchair, the officials were all a little nervous. After all, the name of the Jiming Marquis was just too famous, and it made everyone feel uneasy. The Confucian officials who mocked Ning Chen all quietened down in the morning court. They were not willing to touch his head. The so-called death remonstrating officials were not truly unafraid of death. The death remonstrating officials was actually a tacit agreement between the emperor and the remonstrating officials. The remonstrating officials would die, and the emperor would follow suit. In the end, the remonstrating officials would gain the reputation of being a loyal official who was not afraid of death. The emperor would also gain the reputation of being a magnanimous and wise ruler. In history, there were very few emperors who killed remonstrating officials. Once the emperor really wanted to kill someone, how many of those remonstrating officials would dare to risk their lives to remonstrate? That year, the remonstrating officials of the Confucian faction had pretty much stacked up into a mountain. One could say that any remonstrating official who did not read the Jiming Marquis book and scold him would be embarrassed to say that they were loyal. As the saying goes, the law does not punish the masses. At that time, from the officials to the common people, they all tried their best to pour dirty water on him. No one was afraid of what the Jiming Marquis could do to them. However, it was different now. In the end, the Jiming Marquis was known for being ruthless and murderous. Without the protection of the common people and the two big umbrellas of morality, no one dared to provoke the person in front of them. The morning court quickly ended with everyone having their own thoughts. The things that needed to be said had been said, and the things that needed to be reported had also been reported. However, when the little eunuch was about to announce the end of the court, a calm voice sounded. "Wait." At this moment, Ning Chen, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. He turned his wheelchair around and looked at the group of officials behind him. He said, "Have you all forgotten one thing?" The officials who were about to leave felt their hearts skip a beat. They lowered their heads and looked at each other. They did not know what the Jiming Marquis was talking about. On the dragon throne, Xia Mingri realized that the matter was not as simple as it seemed. His face showed a touch of seriousness. In front of the officials, Ning Chen's eyes gradually turned cold. He said, "I want to know, the hundreds of thousands of disaster victims in Prajna City and the other two cities. How do you plan to deal with them? When do you plan to deal with them?" You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.